Open this door right now, you ungrateful little thief! That was the first thing I heard at 6 in the morning the day after burying my grandparents. My own mother, Vivian, was screaming on the other side of the heavy oak door of Cascade Manor, pounding it with enough force to shake the crystal chandelier in the foyer. I stood in the kitchen clutching a mug of black coffee, trying to steady my trembling hands. I looked at the security monitor. It was a full siege. My mother was practically vibrating with rage, her designer sunglasses pushed up on her head. My father, Lawrence, stood behind her, looking pale and sweating through his linen shirt. My brother Darius was pacing back and forth, kicking at the landscaping I had personally designed. And then there was my sister-in-law, Chloe, standing with her arms crossed, looking at her watch, with that familiar expression of bored condescension. They thought they were coming to evict a squatter. They thought they were throwing out the family failure, the girl who played in the dirt for a living. They had no idea that the most powerful judge in the state of Georgia was sitting at my kitchen island calmly buttering a piece of toast. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to remind your own family exactly who holds the deed to the house. My name is Keisha and I am 28 years old. For my entire life, I have been the invisible child. My brother Darius was the golden boy, the one who could do no wrong, even when he totaled 3 cars before his 21st birthday. My parents, Vivian and Lawrence, were the perfect power couple of Atlanta high society, or at least that is what they paid a publicist to make everyone believe. I was just Keisha, the landscape architect. To them, I was basically a glorified gardener. But my grandparents saw me. They saw everything. Vivian screamed again, her voice shrill enough to wake the neighbors in this exclusive, gated community. I am giving you 5 minutes to open this door, Keisha. 5 minutes before I have this man drill the lock and we drag you out by your hair. You think you can hide in my house. You think you can steal my inheritance and get away with it. I pressed the intercom button, my voice sounding calmer than I felt. This is not your house, Mother. It never was. Please leave before you embarrass yourself further. Chloe stepped up to the camera lens, her face filling the screen. She smoothed her blonde hair and gave me that pitying smile she usually reserved for the waitstaff. Keisha, listen to me. We are trying to help you. Legally, you are trespassing. This is a multi-million-dollar estate, not a homeless shelter. Mom and Dad let you stay here last night out of pity because you were hysterical after the funeral. But the charity stops now. We have a locksmith here. Do not make us use force. It will look so bad on your record when you apply for your next landscaping gig. The audacity took my breath away. Pity. They claim they showed me pity. My mind flashed back to 12 hours ago, to the reading of the will that had turned our world upside down. We were sitting in the mahogany-lined conference room of Mr. Henderson, my grandparents' attorney. My parents had walked in like they owned the place. They were already planning the renovations for Cascade Manor. Vivian had spent the entire drive over talking about how she was going to tear out my grandmother's rose garden to put in an infinity pool. Darius was browsing luxury cars on his phone. When Mr. Henderson opened the leather folder, the air in the room was thick with greed. He adjusted his glasses and looked at my parents with a cold, hard stare. He read the preamble quietly, and then he dropped the bomb that shattered their reality. To my son Lawrence and his wife Vivian, I leave nothing. Not one dime. Not one piece of silver. You claimed you were too busy to visit us in our final years. You claimed you could not interrupt your European vacation when my wife fell ill. You have lived off my generosity for 40 years, and that ends today. My father had stood up so fast his chair fell over. This is a mistake, he had stuttered. Dad would never do this. Mr. Henderson had ignored him and turned to me. To my granddaughter Keisha, who sat by my bedside when I forgot my own name. Who managed my medical care when her own parents could not be bothered to answer the phone. Who loved us not for what we had, but for who we were. To Keisha, I leave the entirety of my estate, including Cascade Manor, my investment portfolio, and all liquid assets. total value estimated at $30 million. The silence that followed had been deafening, and then the screaming started. Vivian had lunged across the table trying to grab the papers. Darius had thrown his phone against the wall. They called me a manipulator, a liar, a thief. They said I had poisoned my grandparents' minds against them. They chased me out of the office, and later that night when I went to my parents' house to get my things, they threw my clothes out onto the driveway in the pouring rain. "You are dead to us," Vivian had screamed from the porch while I gathered my soaked belongings. "You are not my daughter until you sign that money back to us. Don't you dare come crawling back when you realize you are too stupid to manage that kind of wealth." I had driven straight to Cascade Manor, my grandparents' house. My house. I had slept in my old room, the one my grandmother kept ready for me, terrified and grieving and overwhelmed. And now here they were at 6 in the morning trying to break down my door. The sound of a power drill cutting into metal snapped me back to the present. Lawrence was actually doing it. He was ordering the locksmith to drill out the lock of a house he did not own. I shouted into the intercom, "Dad, stop this! I am calling the police!" Chloe laughed, and it was a cold, sharp sound that cut through the morning air. "Go ahead, Keisha. Call them. Sheriff Patterson is Dad's golf partner. Who do you think he is going to believe? The distinguished businessman and his wife, or the unstable daughter who has been off her meds since her grandparents died? That is the story we are going with, by the way. That you are having a mental breakdown. It is for your own good, really. We need to get you into a facility so we can manage the estate properly." My blood ran cold. They were not just here to kick me out. They were here to destroy my credibility. They were going to have me committed if that is what it took to get control of the $30 million. I looked at the man sitting at my kitchen island. He had not moved. He was just watching me, his eyes dark and unreadable. I waited. The front door lock gave way with a loud crack. The heavy wood swung open and they poured into the foyer like a flood of toxic water. Vivian was the first one in. She did not even look at the architecture she claimed to love so much. She made a beeline for me, her hand raised. She slapped me. The sound echoed in the high-ceilinged hallway. My cheek burned, but I did not flinch. I just looked at her, this woman who had given birth to me but had never been a mother. "Sign the papers," Vivian hissed, shoving a stack of documents into my chest. "Sign them now, transferring everything to your father, and we might let you keep your car. Refuse, and I promise you, Keisha, I will ruin you. I will make sure no one in Atlanta ever hires you again. I will tell everyone how you abused your grandmother, how you forced a senile old woman to change her will." Darius came in behind her, kicking over a vase of fresh hydrangeas I had cut from the garden yesterday. He laughed as the water soaked into the antique rug. "Oops," he said with a smirk. "Looks like the gardener missed a spot. Where is the safe, Keisha? I know Grandpa kept cash in the house. Tell me the combination or I start breaking things you actually care about." He picked up my laptop, the one with all my design projects, and held it over the marble floor. Chloe walked in last, closing the broken door behind her. She looked around the foyer with a critical eye. "We will have to redo all of this," she said casually, as if I wasn't standing there with a stinging cheek. "This wallpaper is hideous." "Keisha, be reasonable. You are out of your depth. You do not know how to handle money. You do not know how to manage a property like this. Lawrence and Vivian have the experience. Just sign the papers and go back to your little apartment. We are doing you a favor. You do not belong here. You never did." My father Lawrence finally stepped into the light. He looked at me, and for a second, I saw shame in his eyes, but it was quickly replaced by desperation. He was broke. I knew that from the financial documents Mr. Henderson had shown me. He had run his own business into the ground and had been borrowing money from my grandparents for years to keep up appearances. Without this inheritance, he was finished. "Keisha," he said, his voice shaking, "just do as your mother says. We are a family. We need to keep this money in the family. You can't just take it all. It isn't right." I took a step back, my hand touching the cool granite of the kitchen island. "I am not signing anything," I said, my voice quiet but steady. "And you are right, Dad. We are a family, which makes what you are doing right now so much worse." You are breaking into my home. You are assaulting me. You are threatening me. And for what? For money that Grandpa specifically said you did not deserve. Vivian stepped forward again, her eyes wild. She raised her hand for another slap. You ungrateful little witch. I brought you into this world and I can take you out of it. You are nothing without us. Nothing. Stop! The voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of a gavel striking a sound block. It stopped Vivian mid-strike. It froze Darius with my laptop still held high. Lawrence turned pale as a sheet. Slowly, the man sitting at the kitchen island turned his swivel chair around. He placed his coffee mug down on the counter with a deliberate click. He was an older man with gray hair cropped close and a posture that commanded respect even in a casual polo shirt. But everyone in Atlanta knew that face. Everyone in the high society circles my parents desperately tried to cling to knew that voice. It was Judge Sterling, the Chief Justice of the state Supreme Court, the man who had sent corrupt senators to prison, the man whose reputation for justice was as ironclad as the vault at the bank. And he was my grandfather's best friend. He stood up slowly, his eyes scanning the room with a look of absolute disgust. Lawrence dropped his car keys. Vivian's hand fell to her side, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. Chloe, who had been so confident a moment ago, looked like she might faint. Judge Sterling walked over to stand beside me. He put a protective hand on my shoulder. You made a mistake, Vivian, he said, his voice low and dangerous. You said Keisha was nothing without you. But you forgot one thing. She is not without you. She is with me. Lawrence tried to speak, but only a squeak came out. Judge Sterling, we didn't know you didn't know I was here. Judge Sterling finished for him. You didn't know that Arthur asked me to stay here last night to ensure his granddaughter's safety because he knew exactly what kind of vultures you are. He looked at the broken lock on the front door, breaking and entering, assault, attempted extortion, and conspiracy to defraud an heir. I believe that is about 20 years of prison time standing in this foyer right now. Chloe tried to pivot, her survival instincts kicking in. Judge Sterling, this is a misunderstanding. We were just concerned about Keisha's mental state. We heard she was… Be quiet, Chloe, the judge snapped. I have been sitting here for 10 minutes, listening to you threaten to have a sane young woman committed to a mental institution so you could steal her money. I have recorded every word on my phone. He tapped the device sitting on the counter. He turned to the open door where the locksmith was still standing looking terrified. You son, he called out. You might want to leave before I decide you are an accomplice. The locksmith didn't need to be told twice. He ran to his van and peeled out of the driveway. Judge Sterling turned back to my parents. His eyes were cold. Now, you have exactly 60 seconds to get off this property before I call the real police. Not your golf buddy, Sheriff Patterson. I am calling the state troopers. And Lawrence, if you ever come near this girl again, I will personally oversee the audit of your business. I know about the offshore accounts. I know about the tax evasion. Do not test me. Vivian looked at me one last time. There was no love in her eyes, only pure hatred. You will regret this, Keisha, she spat. You will die alone in this big house. I looked at her, at the woman who cared more about her status than her child. Get out, I said. They scrambled. It was pathetic, really. Darius put my laptop down gently on the table, as if he hadn't just been threatening to smash it. Lawrence tried to shake Judge Sterling's hand, but the judge just stared at him until he pulled it back. Chloe didn't even look at me, she just rushed out to her car, pulling her phone out, presumably to call a lawyer. When the door slammed shut, leaving us in the quiet foyer, I felt my knees give way. Judge Sterling caught me, guiding me to a chair. I am sorry you had to go through that, he said gently. Your grandfather hoped they would be better. But he prepared for them to be exactly who they are. He reached into his briefcase, which had been sitting by his feet. He pulled out a thick manila envelope. This is why I am really here, Keisha. The $30 million is just the surface. Your grandfather left you this. He called it the insurance policy. I opened the envelope. Inside were documents, detailed records, emails, and photos. It wasn't just money, it was leverage. Proof of every dirty deal my father had made, every social ladder climbing lie my mother had told, and secrets about Chloe's family that would ruin them in this town. Use this wisely, Judge Sterling said. They will be back. People like that always come back. But now you have the ammunition to end them. I looked at the papers in my hand. I wasn't just an heiress anymore. I was the keeper of their destruction. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of them. I was ready. That night, I hired a private security team. I changed the locks to biometric scanners. I sat in my grandfather's study looking out over the estate that was now mine. I thought it was over. I thought I had won. But I was wrong. The next morning, I woke up to my bank accounts frozen and a lawsuit served by a courier. They weren't giving up. They had found a loophole, a clause in the will that they thought they could exploit. But they didn't know I had the insurance policy. And they didn't know that I had found something else in the safe in the floor of the closet. A diary. My grandmother's diary. And what was written on the last page changed everything I thought I knew about my family. It turns out the reason they hated me wasn't because I was a failure. It was because I was the only one who didn't know the secret of my birth. I picked up the phone and dialed Judge Sterling. "We have a problem," I said. "They are suing." "Good," he replied. "Let them sue. It will just make it easier to expose them in court. Bring the diary, Keisha. It is time the world knew who Lawrence and Vivian really are." I walked to the window watching the storm clouds gather over Atlanta. The war had just begun, and I was going to burn their world to the ground. The sound of my mother's palm connecting with my cheek echoed through the cavernous foyer of Cascade Manor like a gunshot. It was not a slap of correction or a slap of impulse. It was a strike delivered with the full weight of 30 years of resentment. My head snapped to the side, and the taste of copper filled my mouth. For a second, the only sound in the room was the heavy breathing of the woman who had given birth to me and the frantic beating of my own heart. I slowly turned my face back to look at her. Vivian stood there, chest heaving, her designer silk blouse rippling with her tremors of rage. Her eyes were not the eyes of a parent looking at a child. They were the eyes of a creditor looking at a defaulted debt. "Sign it," she screamed, shoving a thick stack of legal documents into my chest so hard I stumbled back against the grand staircase. "I have had these drawn up since the funeral. You think I did not know you were manipulating your grandfather? You think I did not see you whispering in his ear, poisoning him against his own flesh and blood? Sign the transfer of deed. Sign the release of the trust. Sign it all over to Lawrence and me right now, or so help me God, I will make you wish you had never been born." I looked down at the papers crinkling against my shirt. They were comprehensive. A total abdication of my inheritance. A complete surrender of the home my grandparents had built, the fortune they had amassed, and the legacy they had specifically chosen to entrust to me. My silence only infuriated her further. She grabbed my shoulders, her manicured nails digging into my skin, drawing blood. "Do you hear me, Keisha? You are nothing. You are a gardener, a dirt player. You think you can manage a portfolio like this. You think you can sit on the board of the foundation. You are an embarrassment. We let you play pretend with your little landscaping business because we thought it kept you out of the way. But this is theft. You stole this life from us." Before I could answer, a loud crash from the living room made us both jump. I looked past my mother to see my brother Darius standing by the antique mahogany desk my grandfather used to work at. Ideally, he was holding a crystal vase, one of my grandmother's favorites. He met my eyes with a smirk that was chilling in its casual cruelty and let the vase drop. It shattered into 1,000 glittering shards on the hardwood floor. "Oops," Darius drawled, stepping over the wreckage. Clumsy me. You know, Keisha, this place is really too cluttered. It needs a modern touch. Maybe we should start clearing things out now. Save the movers some time. He picked up my laptop from the desk. It was a high-end workstation machine bought with my own savings, containing months of design work, client blueprints, and the entire backup of my business records. He weighed it in his hands, pretending to inspect it. "Darius, put that down," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "That is my work. That is my life." "Your life?" He laughed, a harsh barking sound. "Your life is what we say it is. You exist because we allow it. You have a roof over your head because we are generous, and now you want to act like the queen of the castle." He raised the laptop high above his head. I lunged forward, but my father Lawrence stepped in front of me, blocking my path with his heavy frame. He did not look me in the eye. He just stood there, a wall of weak complicity, allowing his son to destroy his daughter's livelihood. Darius threw the laptop down with force. It hit the marble threshold of the hallway with a sickening crunch. Plastic cracked, screen shattered. The device skidded across the floor, a broken, twisted piece of metal and glass. "That is what your little career is worth," Darius spat. "Garbage. Just like you. Now stop stalling and sign the papers Mom gave you. Or I start on the windows next. Then maybe the car. How much destruction can you afford, Keisha?" I looked at the broken remains of my computer. I looked at the shattered vase. And then I looked at my family. For years I had cowered before them. I had swallowed their insults, accepted their neglect, and internalized their disdain. I had believed them when they said I was unworthy. But standing there in the ruins of their violence, something inside me calcified. The fear evaporated, replaced by a cold clarity that was sharper than the crystal shards on the floor. "You talk about worth," I said, my voice steady, rising over the sound of my mother's panting breath. "You talk about what I deserve. Let us talk about deserve, Vivian. Let us talk about where you were 3 years ago." Vivian narrowed her eyes. "Do not change the subject. I am not changing it." I stepped around my father, moving into the center of the room. 3 years ago, Grandma started forgetting names. She left the stove on. She wandered out into the street in her nightgown. Grandpa was too frail to chase her. He called you. He called you every day for a week, begging for help because he could not handle her dementia alone. I stared at my mother, forcing her to meet my gaze. "And where were you? You were in Paris. You were posting photos of yourself drinking champagne on a boat on the Seine. When Grandpa told you he needed you to come home, you told him you could not possibly interrupt your anniversary trip. You told him to hire a nurse. You told him to stop being dramatic." "That is a lie," Vivian shrieked, but her eyes darted away. "We sent money. We hired the best help. You sent nothing," I countered, my voice rising. "You drained the operating account of the family business to pay for that trip." Grandpa showed me the statements. And when the nurse did not show up who moved in here, who slept on the floor by Grandma's bed for 6 months because she was terrified of the dark, who fed her, who bathed her when she could not bathe herself, who held her hand when she screamed because she did not know who I was. It was not you, Vivian. It was never you. And it certainly was not Darius. I turned to my brother, who was now leaning against the mantel, looking bored, but with a flicker of unease in his eyes. "And you?" I said, pointing at him. "You talk about my career being garbage. Let's talk about your career, Darius. Or should we call it what it is? Professional leech." "Shut up," Darius growled, taking a step toward me. "No, I will not shut up. Not anymore." Do you remember my sophomore year of college? I had a full tuition scholarship, but I still needed money for books, for housing, for food. I worked 2 jobs. I was a waitress and a library assistant. And then I saved up $5,000. $5,000 that I was going to use to study abroad. It took me 2 years to save that money. Darius rolled his eyes. "Who cares about your little savings account?" "I care!" I screamed, the emotion finally breaking through. "I care because one day I went to the bank and it was gone. The account was empty. And when I called Mom crying, thinking I had been hacked, she told me not to worry about it. She told me the family had an emergency. I turned back to Vivian. Your emergency was buying Darius a brand new Range Rover for his 21st birthday. You took my tuition money, my food money, the money I scrubbed floors for, and you used it to buy a luxury car for the son who had just flunked out of community college. It was a graduation gift, Vivian scoffed. He needed reliable transportation. You were just being selfish, hoarding money when your brother needed help. That is your problem, Keisha. You have always been selfish. You never think about the family image. The family image, I laughed, a sound devoid of humor. The image of a family that cannibalizes its own children. Grandpa knew. He knew about the car. He knew about the tuition. He knew about Paris. That is why he changed the will. It wasn't manipulation. It was restitution. Lawrence finally spoke up, his voice booming in the enclosed space. That is enough, Keisha. You are hysterical. You are twisting the past to justify your theft. Your grandfather was sick. He was not in his right mind. You took advantage of a dying man. I took care of a dying man, I corrected him, while you were busy leveraging his company to pay off your bad investments. Do you think I do not know about the loans, Dad? Do you think Mr. Henderson did not show me the books? You are drowning. You are broke. That is why you are here at 6 in the morning breaking down doors. You do not care about legacy. You care about liquidity. You need this house to pay off the sharks you borrowed from. Lawrence turned a shade of purple that was dangerous. You have no idea what you are talking about. Business is complicated. It is not complicated, I said. You failed, and you want me to pay for it. Again. Just like I paid for Darius' car. Just like I paid for Mom's vacations with my neglect. Well, the Bank of Keisha is closed. Permanently. Chloe, who had been watching from the doorway with a look of distaste, stepped forward. Her heels clicked sharply on the floor. Look, this is all very touching, really. A real family tragedy. But let's get back to reality. You cannot keep this house, Keisha. You cannot afford the property taxes. You cannot afford the upkeep. You are a landscape architect, for heaven's sake. You dig holes for a living. These people, she gestured to my parents and brother, they know how to manage wealth. They know how to sustain a lifestyle. If you keep this money, you will lose it all in a year. Sign the papers. Take a small payout. We can write you a check for $50,000. That is more money than you have ever seen. Go buy yourself a new laptop and a nice little condo in the suburbs. Leave the real estate to the adults. $50,000. They were offering me crumbs from a $30 million loaf and expecting me to say thank you. I looked at Chloe, the woman who had married my brother, and immediately adopted my mother's sneer. You think this is about ability? She said. You think I am not capable? I built my business from nothing. I have clients all over the city. I know how to budget. I know how to work. Unlike anyone standing in this room, I know the value of $1 because I had to earn every single one of them. Darius grabbed a heavy bronze statue from the side table. I am done listening to this, he yelled. Sign the papers, or I swear to God I will smash every single thing in this house that you love. I will start with the paintings, then the windows, then your face. He raised the statue, looking wild and unhinged. This was not just a threat. He was going to do it. The violence that had always simmered under the surface of our family dynamic was boiling over. They were desperate animals cornered by their own greed, and they were ready to tear me apart to get what they wanted. Vivian did not stop him. She crossed her arms and watched a cruel smile playing on her lips. See what you made him do, she said calmly. This is your fault, Keisha. You bring out the worst in people. Just sign the document and nobody gets hurt. I looked at the pen she was holding out to me. I looked at Darius with the statue poised to strike. I looked at my father, who was looking at the floor, refusing to witness the violence his silence was sanctioning. I took a breath. The air in the room felt thick and toxic. No, I said. Darius roared and swung the statue toward a glass display case filled with my grandmother's porcelain collection. Do it! I shouted over him, my voice stopping his arm in mid-air. Break it all. Burn the house down. It does not matter. Because the deed is already recorded. The trust is already executed. Even if you destroy every brick of this mansion, you will not get a cent. And every piece you break, every bruise you put on me, is just another line in the police report. Another piece of evidence for the restraining order. You think the police will help you? Vivian laughed, shrill and manic. You poor stupid girl. We are the Addams family. We own this town. We write the checks that keep the police department running. When the sheriff gets here, he will see a mentally unstable girl who trashed her own house in a fit of grief. We will have you in a psych hold by noon, and then we will have power of attorney by dinner. She stepped closer into my personal space, her perfume cloying and suffocating. You have no friends, Keisha. You have no allies. You have nobody. You are alone in this house, and you are alone in this world. Now be a good girl and do as you are told. She grabbed my wrist, forcing the pen into my hand. Darius stepped closer, looming over me with the heavy bronze weapon. Lawrence blocked the exit. It was a perfect circle of intimidation. I felt the cold plastic of the pen. I felt the heat of my mother's hand on mine. I looked around the room where my grandfather used to read to me, the room where my grandmother used to teach me how to arrange flowers. They had turned a sanctuary into a prison cell. But they had forgotten one thing. They had forgotten that while they were spending money, I was making connections. They had forgotten that while they were at country clubs, I was at community board meetings. And most importantly, they had forgotten that my grandfather was not just a rich man, he was a man of honor, and men of honor have friends in high places. I looked past my mother's shoulder toward the kitchen, toward the man who had been sitting quietly in the shadows, witnessing every threat, every admission, every act of violence. You said I have no allies, Mother, I whispered. You said I am alone. Vivian sneered. You are. Look around. There is nobody coming to save you. I smiled, and for the first time that morning it was a genuine smile. I wouldn't be so sure about that. Just then the sound of a chair scraping against the kitchen floor broke the tension. Heavy footsteps echoed on the tile, slow, deliberate, authoritative. My mother's head snapped around. Darius lowered the statue. Lawrence looked up from the floor. From the shadows of the hallway, a figure emerged. He was adjusting his glasses and holding a notepad where he had been meticulously writing down every word that had been spoken in the last 15 minutes. I think you folks have said quite enough. The deep baritone voice rumbled, filling the room with a terrifying gravity. Vivian gasped, dropping my wrist as if it were burning. Lawrence looked like he had seen a ghost. Hello, Lawrence, the man said, stepping into the light. Hello, Vivian. It has been a long time. It was Judge Sterling. And he looked ready to pass a sentence that would end their world. I tried to run. The air in the foyer was suffocating thick with the heat of violence and the stench of my brother's expensive cologne. I needed air. I needed to get away from these people who wore the faces of my family but carried the souls of wolves. I lunged toward the French doors that led to the back terrace, my hand outstretched for the brass handle. I just wanted to get to the garden, to the soil, and the roses where things made sense. You are not going anywhere, Keisha. My father's hand clamped around my upper arm like a vice. For a man who had spent the last decade sitting behind a desk pretending to be a CEO, Lawrence still had a grip like steel. He yanked me back so hard my teeth rattled. He shoved me into the wall next to a portrait of my great-grandfather. The heavy frame rattled ominously. We are not finished. Lawrence snarled, his face inches from mine. His breath smelled of stale coffee and desperation. You do not get to walk away from this. You do not get to steal our future and then go prune your bushes. We are going to settle this right now. I struggled against him, but Darius moved to block my other side. I was trapped, pinned between the wall and the two men who were supposed to protect me from the world. Instead, they were the ones I needed protection from. Then the sound started. It began as a single vibration in the pocket of my jeans, a text message, then another, then another. Within seconds, my phone was not just buzzing, it was convulsing against my hip, a continuous spasm of notifications that sounded like a swarm of angry hornets. It did not stop. It was a relentless mechanical assault. Chloe stepped forward, her phone glowing in her hand. The screen illuminated her face, giving her a ghostly, triumphant look. She swiped her thumb across the glass with the casual elegance of an executioner sharpening a blade. "Oh, look," she said, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. "It seems the news is out." You know, Keisha, news travels fast in Atlanta, especially when you have the right network. And I have a very extensive network. I managed to wrench one hand free and pulled my phone from my pocket. My lock screen was a blur of banners, text messages, Instagram DMs, Facebook notifications, missed calls. It was an avalanche. I unlocked the screen and my stomach dropped through the floor. The first message was from Mrs. Gable, a woman who had hired me to redesign her garden 3 years ago, a woman who had recommended me to half the city. "I am canceling our contract immediately," the message read. "Do not step foot on my property again. I do not do business with elder abusers." Elder abusers. The words made the room spin. I scrolled down. A message from my college roommate. "I cannot believe you did that to your grandparents, Keisha. I thought I knew you." Blocked. A message from the head of the local botanical society where I volunteered every weekend. "We have voted to remove you from the board effective immediately. Please return your key." "What did you do?" I whispered, looking up at Chloe. Chloe smiled and turned her phone screen toward me. It was a post in the Atlanta High Society private Facebook group, a group with 5,000 members, the wealthiest, most influential people in the state, the people who hired me, the people who could make or break a reputation with a whisper. The post had a photo of me. It was a photo from 2 years ago taken at a family barbecue where I looked tired and disheveled because I had spent the previous night at the hospital with my grandmother. But the caption Chloe had written painted a very different picture. "It breaks my heart to share this family tragedy publicly," the post read. "But we need the community's support. We have discovered that my sister-in-law, Keisha, has been systematically manipulating and abusing our beloved grandparents Lawrence and Marie for years. While the rest of the family worked tirelessly to support them, Keisha isolated them, withheld their medication, and forced them to sign a new will while they were in a state of dementia. She is now squatting in their home, refusing to let her grieving parents enter to collect their personal belongings. We are devastated. Please pray for the Adams family as we fight this injustice." Below the text were hundreds of comments. "Disgusting. Lock her up. I always knew there was something off about her. She looks like a criminal. This is why you cannot trust people who work with their hands." It was a digital lynching. In the span of 10 minutes, Chloe had destroyed everything I had built. My reputation, my business, my name. She had taken the truth that I was the only one who cared for them and twisted it into a weapon to destroy me. "You lied," I gasped. "You know that is a lie. You know I was the one who fed them. I was the one who changed their sheets." Chloe shrugged. "Perception is reality, Keisha. And right now the perception is that you are a monster. These people trust me. They know my family. They know my husband. You are just the help. And now you are the villain." My phone rang again. A shrill, piercing ringtone that cut through the tension. I looked at the screen. Aunt Bernice. My heart hammered against my ribs. Aunt Bernice was the matriarch of the extended family, my grandfather's sister. She was 80 years old, a woman of iron faith and rigid standards. She had been the one who taught me how to make peach cobbler. She had been the one who sent me $20 in a card every Easter. I answered the phone, my hand shaking so hard I almost dropped it. "Aunt Bernice, Silence. Cold, hard silence on the other end. And then a voice that sounded like ice cracking. "Do not call me aunt." The words were a physical blow. "Aunt Bernice, please listen to me. Chloe is lying. I said silence, she snapped. I just saw the messages. I just spoke to your mother. She told me everything. She told me how you locked them out of the house. She told me how you forged the signature. I did not forge anything. I cried, tears hot and stinging in my eyes. Grandpa left it to me. He would never leave his legacy to a thief, she screamed, her voice breaking with rage. You are a disgrace to this bloodline, Keisha. You are a stain on your grandfather's memory. I held you when you were a baby. I prayed over you. And this is how you repay us. By stealing from your own father, by shaming us in front of the whole city. Aunt Bernice, please. I hope you rot, she hissed. I hope that money burns a hole in your soul. Do not come to the family reunion. Do not come to the church. If I see your face, I will spit on it. You are dead to this family. The line went dead. I lowered the phone slowly. The silence in the foyer was heavy, thick with the weight of my isolation. I looked at my parents. Vivian was watching me with a look of satisfied vindication. She didn't care that her sister-in-law hated her daughter. She only cared that she was winning. See, Vivian said, stepping closer, her voice silky and cruel. Everyone knows now. There is nowhere to run. You have no friends. You have no family. You have no clients. You are completely alone. I felt the walls of the house closing in on me. This house that had been my sanctuary was now a tomb. The community I had grown up in, the people I had waved to in the grocery store, the neighbors I had helped with their gardens, they had all turned on me in the blink of an eye. The speed of the betrayal was breathtaking. It didn't matter that I had lived a life of integrity. It didn't matter that I had never stolen a candy bar, let alone a fortune. One lie from a woman with the right last name and the right skin tone, and I was erased. Darius laughed from his spot by the shattered vase. You should see the group chat, sis. Cousin Marcus just said he is going to come over here and drag you out himself. He said nobody disrespects the family like this. You better sign those papers before the mob gets here. I looked at my phone again. A notification from my bank popped up. Account frozen. Suspicious activity reported. Chloe had not just attacked my reputation. She had attacked my survival. She had reported my accounts for fraud. I had no access to money. I had no access to support. I was trapped in a mansion with 3 people who wanted to destroy me and a city outside that wanted to see me burn. I sank to the floor, my back sliding down the wall until I hit the cold marble. The fight drained out of me. What was the point? Even if I kept the house, I would be a pariah. I would be the crazy woman in the big house on the hill, the one everyone whispered about, the one who stole from her dying grandparents. Just sign it. Lawrence said, his voice almost gentle now, almost paternal. Just sign it, Keisha, and we can make the posts go away. We can tell everyone it was a misunderstanding. We can say you had a mental health crisis and we got you help. People love a redemption story. We can fix this. Just give us the house. He held the pen out to me. It looked like a lifeline, a way to stop the pain, a way to stop the buzzing of the phone that was filled with hatred, a way to get my mother to look at me with something other than loathing. I reached for the pen. My hand was heavy like lead. I looked at the line on the document where my signature would sign away my life. Grandpa, I whispered. I am sorry. I cannot do it. They are too strong. I felt the cool plastic of the pen barrel against my fingers. Vivian let out a breath she had been holding. Chloe smirked triumphantly. Darius kicked a piece of glass across the floor. But then I saw it. Under the console table where I was sitting, there was a small scuff mark on the baseboard. It was from a toy truck I had crashed into the wall when I was 5 years old. Grandpa had never painted over it. He used to point to it and say, "That is where Keisha made her mark. That is where she proved she was a force of nature. A force of nature." I looked at the pen. I looked at Lawrence. I looked at the phone that was still vibrating with the hate of 1,000 strangers. They could take my reputation. They could take my business. They could take my family. But they could not take the truth. The truth was written in the will. The truth was written in the years I spent wiping drool from my grandmother's chin while they drank wine in Europe. The truth was that I loved them, and they loved money. And if I signed this paper, I wasn't just giving them a house. I was giving them permission to rewrite history. I was letting them turn my grandfather's love into a lie. I gripped the pen tighter, but I didn't sign. I stood up slowly, using the wall for support. I looked at Lawrence, and I saw the fear behind his eyes. He was terrified. He was terrified because he knew that without this signature he was ruined. "I am not signing," I said. My voice was raspy, but it was mine. Vivian's face contorted. "What did you say?" I said no. Chloe let out a frustrated shriek. "You stupid girl. Look at your phone. Your life is over. We destroyed you. You destroyed a version of me," I said. "You destroyed the Keisha who cared what people thought. You destroyed the Keisha who wanted your approval, but you didn't destroy the owner of this house." "Then we will do it the hard way," Lawrence growled. He pulled out his phone. "I am calling Patterson. I told him you were having a breakdown. I told him you were a danger to yourself. He is on his way with a 51-50 hold order. We are going to have you committed, Keisha. And once you are declared incompetent, I will get power of attorney, and I will sign those papers myself." Sirens wailed in the distance. They were getting closer. They were really doing it. They were going to lock me away. They were going to use the police to finish what the internet started. I looked at the door. I looked at my family. And for the first time in my life, I realized that blood didn't mean anything. Blood was just biology. Loyalty was a choice, and they had chosen their side. The sirens grew louder. Blue lights flashed through the transom window above the broken door. Tires screeched on the driveway. Lawrence smiled. It was a smile of pure malice. "Game over, Keisha. The cavalry is here. But they are not here for you." Heavy boots stomped up the front steps. The doorway darkened as 3 uniformed officers filled the frame. In the center was Sheriff Patterson, a man with a belly that strained his buttons and eyes that had looked the other way for my father's drunk driving twice. Sheriff Lawrence said, stepping forward, his voice smooth and authoritative. "Thank God you are here. My daughter, she has completely snapped. She broke the door. She destroyed her own computer. She is threatening us. We need to get her to a facility immediately." Sheriff Patterson looked at me. He saw the bruise on my cheek from my mother's slap. He saw the glass on the floor. He saw a young black woman standing alone against 3 well-dressed, respectable citizens. "Grab her!" Patterson barked to his deputies. "Cuff her. Use force if you have to. She looks manic." 2 deputies moved toward me, their hands on their tasers. I backed up against the kitchen island. This was it. This was the end. I was going to be dragged out of my own home in handcuffs, screaming the truth, while everyone shook their heads and said what a tragedy it was that I had lost my mind. One deputy reached for my arm. I closed my eyes, bracing for the cold steel of the cuffs. But the cuffs never came. Instead, a sound cut through the noise of the sirens and the shouting. It was the sound of a car engine, not a police cruiser, a deep, powerful purr of a 12-cylinder engine. A car door slammed, not a slam of haste, but a slam of authority. "Hold it," the voice boomed from the driveway. It wasn't loud, but it had a timbre that made the air vibrate. It was a voice that stopped trials cold, a voice that had pronounced life sentences. The deputies froze. Sheriff Patterson turned around, his hand dropping from his holster. Lawrence looked past the police, his eyes widening in horror. Walking up the driveway past the police cruisers, past the broken door, past the shattered glass, was a man in a black wool coat. He walked with a cane, but he didn't lean on it. He used it like a scepter. It was Judge Sterling. And he wasn't alone. Behind him were 2 men in dark suits with earpieces. State agents. The judge stopped at the threshold. He looked at the sheriff. He looked at my parents. And then he looked at me. "Get your hands off her," he said to the deputy. His voice was calm, deadly calm. Sheriff Patterson stuttered. "Judge Sterling, sir, we were just— This is a domestic disturbance. Mr. Adams called." "Mr. Adams is a liar," Judge Sterling said, stepping into the foyer. "And you, Patterson, are about to be an unemployed liar." He walked past the stunned police officers and stood next to me. He put a hand on my shoulder, and for the first time since my grandfather died, I felt safe. I apologize for the delay, Keisha, the judge said. I had to make a few calls. It seems there is a conspiracy to commit fraud taking place in my district. And I hate fraud. He turned to face my family. His eyes swept over them like a searchlight. Now, who wants to explain to me why you are trespassing in my goddaughter's house? Sheriff Patterson walked into the foyer of Cascade Manor with the casual arrogance of a man who knew his authority would never be questioned. He did not look at the splinters of wood from the doorframe his locksmith had drilled through. He did not look at the shattered crystal vase on the floor or the broken laptop that contained my livelihood. He did not even look at me, the woman standing against the kitchen island with a bruised cheek and terror in her eyes. His eyes went straight to my father. Lawrence. He boomed, his voice thick with false concern and the familiarity of countless Sunday mornings spent on the golf course. I got here as fast as I could. Dispatch said you called in a code 4. Everyone all right? My father exhaled a long, shaky breath that was a masterclass in acting. He stepped over the debris of the violence he had orchestrated and extended a hand to the sheriff. Patterson gripped it firmly, shaking it with both hands in a gesture of solidarity that made my stomach turn. "Thank you for coming," Sheriff Lawrence said, his voice trembling just enough to sound like a distraught parent pushed to his limit. "It has been a nightmare. An absolute nightmare. We did not want to involve the law. You know how much we value our privacy. But she left us no choice." Patterson finally turned his head to look at me. His gaze was cold, flat, and devoid of any humanity. It was the look of a predator assessing prey that had already been wounded. "Is this her?" he asked, thumbing toward me with his chin. "Yes," Lawrence whispered, wiping a non-existent tear from his eye. "This is Keisha. She is not herself, Sheriff. Since my parents died, she has completely unraveled." The grief snapped something in her mind. "We came here this morning just to check on the property to make sure everything was secure, and we found her like this." He gestured vaguely around the room, implying that the destruction was my doing. She was screaming. Lawrence continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush. Ranting about conspiracies, saying she owned the house. She destroyed her own computer because she thought the government was spying on her through the webcam. She attacked her mother. Look at Vivian's arm. Vivian stepped forward right on cue. She held out her arm where a small red mark was visible, likely from when she had grabbed me earlier. But in this narrative, I was the aggressor. She came at me like a wild animal. Vivian sobbed, leaning into the sheriff's personal space. "My own daughter. She tried to push me down the stairs. She kept screaming that this was her house, that she was the queen. It was terrifying, Sheriff. I have never seen eyes like that. It was like looking at a stranger." I stood there frozen by the sheer magnitude of the lie. It was seamless. It was rehearsed. It was perfect. They were painting a picture of a psychotic break, a dangerous manic episode that required immediate intervention, and they were doing it to the one man in the county who had the power to make it stick. "That is a lie," I shouted, my voice cracking. "They broke in. Look at the door. They hit me. Mom slapped me." Sheriff Patterson held up a hand, palm facing me, silencing me as if I were an unruly child in a classroom. "Quiet down, miss," he barked. "I am talking to your father. You will get your turn to speak when you are booked." Booked. The word hung in the air, heavy and final. Lawrence moved closer to the sheriff, lowering his voice but making sure it was still loud enough for the deputies to hear. "We do not want to press charges, Sheriff. She is sick. This is a mental health crisis. If you arrest her, it will be on her record forever. We just want to get her help. She needs to be under observation. We need a 5150 hold. We need to get her to St. Jude's psychiatric wing immediately before she hurts herself or someone else." A 5150 hold. Involuntary psychiatric commitment. It was the nuclear option. If they succeeded in getting me committed even for 72 hours, they would win. I would be declared incompetent. My father, as my next of kin, would be granted emergency power of attorney. He would have access to the accounts, the estate, the house. By the time I managed to prove my sanity, the money would be gone, moved offshore, or hidden in shell companies I would never find. Please, I pleaded, looking at the two deputies standing behind Patterson. Just look at the evidence. I have the deed. It is in my name. My lawyer is Mr. Henderson. Call him. Please just call him. One of the deputies, a young woman, shifted her weight, looking uncomfortable. She looked at the broken door, then at the bruise on my face. She opened her mouth to speak, but Patterson cut her off with a glare. "Mr. Adams, tell me what you need us to do," Patterson said, turning his back to me completely. "Take her in," Lawrence said. "For her own safety. We will follow you to the hospital to sign the admission papers. Just get her out of here before she destroys anything else." Patterson nodded. He unclipped the handcuffs from his belt. The sound of the metal ratchet clicking was the loudest thing in the room. "You heard the man," he said to his deputies. "Secure the subject. She is a danger to herself and others." "No!" I screamed, backing away until my hips hit the sharp edge of the granite island. "You cannot do this. This is kidnapping. This is fraud." The deputies moved in. The young woman looked apologetic, but she followed orders. The other deputy, a large man with a buzz cut, grabbed my left arm and twisted it behind my back. Pain shot through my shoulder. "Stop resisting," he growled, pushing my face down onto the cold stone counter. "I am not resisting. I am telling the truth." I cried, tears streaming down my face, mixing with the dirt and sweat on my cheek. "Dad, please do not do this. Mom, tell them the truth." I looked at my mother. Vivian was watching the scene with a look of pure satisfaction. There was no motherly instinct in her eyes, no hesitation. She was watching her daughter be manhandled by armed officers, and she looked like she was watching her favorite soap opera. She had won. She had proven that in her world power mattered more than blood. The cold steel of the handcuffs bit into my wrists. Click, click. The sound signaled the end of my life. Once those cuffs were on, I was no longer Keisha the heiress, Keisha the business owner, Keisha the granddaughter. I was just a crazy woman being hauled away for her own good. Sheriff Patterson leaned in close to my face. His breath smelled of stale tobacco and mints. "You should have listened to your father, Missy," he whispered so only I could hear. "In this town, you do not go against the people who sign the checks. You learn your place." I felt the air leaving my lungs. It was a panic attack, dark and suffocating. The room started to spin. I saw Chloe smirking in the corner, recording the arrest on her phone, probably already drafting the caption about my tragic breakdown. I saw Darius leaning against the wall, looking bored, ready to start searching for the safe the moment I was dragged out the door. I was completely alone. The system that was supposed to protect me was the weapon being used to destroy me. The family that was supposed to love me was the architect of my ruin. "Okay, get her up," Patterson ordered. "Let us get this over with. I have a tea time at noon." The deputy yanked me upright. My legs felt like rubber. I stumbled and he shoved me forward toward the broken door, toward the police cruiser that would take me to a locked room and a sedated future. This is it, I thought. This is how they win. Not with a lawyer or a judge, but with a lie and a pair of handcuffs. I looked back one last time at the kitchen, hoping for a miracle, hoping for anything. And that is when I saw him. I had been so focused on the police, so consumed by the terror of the arrest, that I had forgotten about the man sitting in the shadows of the breakfast nook. He had been so still, so silent, that he had blended into the background like a piece of furniture. But now he was moving. He stood up from the bar stool slowly, deliberately. The sound of his chair scraping against the tile floor cut through the chaos like a knife. "Excuse me, gentlemen." The voice was deep, resonant, and filled with an authority that made Sheriff Patterson freeze in his tracks. The sheriff turned around, annoyed. "Who are you? This is a private family matter and a police operation. If you are the gardener, get out before I arrest you for obstruction." The man stepped out of the shadows. He adjusted the lapels of his black coat. He did not look at the sheriff. He looked at my father. "Lawrence," he said, his voice calm but carrying a lethal weight. "You seem to have forgotten to introduce your guest to the sheriff." My father's face, which had been flushed with victory, suddenly drained of all color. His knees actually buckled, and he had to grab the doorframe to stay upright. "Oh my God," Lawrence whispered. Sheriff Patterson looked confused. He looked from the stranger to Lawrence, then back again. "Larry, who is this guy?" The man walked forward. He moved with a limp, using a cane with a silver handle, but his presence filled the room, pushing everyone else into the periphery. He stopped 3 feet from the sheriff. "I am not the gardener's son," the man said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a leather wallet. He flipped it open, revealing a gold badge that was larger and shinier than the sheriff's. But it was the ID card next to it that made the deputies take a step back. "I am Judge Marcus Sterling, Chief Justice of the Georgia Supreme Court, and you are currently assaulting my goddaughter in her own home." The silence that fell over the room was absolute. It was the silence of a bomb that had just landed but hadn't yet detonated. Judge Sterling looked at my wrists bound in metal. "Take those cuffs off her, now, or I will have your badge, your pension, and your freedom before the sun sets." The deputy fumbled for his keys, dropping them twice in his panic. Sheriff Patterson looked like he was going to be sick. Vivian let out a small, strangled, whimpering sound. The cuffs clicked open. My arms fell free. Judge Sterling put a hand on my shoulder. "I told you, Keisha," he said, looking at my terrified family with eyes that burned with cold fire. "You are not alone. And they are about to find out exactly what happens when you wake a sleeping giant." The metal of the handcuffs brushed against my wrist, cold and final. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the click that would end my life as I knew it. My mother's triumphant breathing was the only sound I could hear over the rushing of blood in my ears. She had won. They had all won. But the click never came. Instead, a low rumble vibrated through the floorboards, shaking the very foundation of the house. It wasn't the sound of thunder or the police cruiser. It was the deep, guttural purr of a finely tuned engine, an engine that cost more than most people earned in a decade. Tires crunched heavily on the gravel of the circular driveway, followed by the heavy thud of a car door slamming shut. It sounded like a gavel striking a bench. "Hold it right there." The shout came from outside, not from the sheriff. It was the voice of the sheriff's deputy who had been standing guard by the patrol car. But his voice wasn't authoritative anymore, it was trembling. Sheriff Patterson frowned, his hand hovering over the handcuffs. "What is going on out there?" He turned toward the broken front door just as a shadow fell across the threshold, blocking out the morning sun. The light in the foyer dimmed and a hush fell over the room that was heavier than the violence that had preceded it. A chauffeur in a black suit stepped into the frame. He didn't look at the police or my parents. He simply reached out and held the broken door open wide, bowing his head slightly in deference to whoever was behind him. And then he stepped in. The man was a mountain of a figure, dressed in a charcoal 3-piece suit that was tailored to perfection. He leaned on an ebony cane topped with silver, not because he needed it, but because it gave him the air of a king surveying his subjects. His hair was salt and pepper cropped close, and his eyes behind gold-rimmed spectacles were sharp, intelligent, and currently burning with a cold fury that could freeze hell over. Judge Marcus Sterling, the Chief Justice, the man who ate corrupt politicians for breakfast, the man whose signature on a warrant made grown men weep, and my grandfather's oldest, dearest friend. The silence in the room stretched until it was almost painful. Sheriff Patterson dropped the handcuffs. They clattered onto the marble floor, a noise that echoed like a gunshot in a canyon. He took a stumbling step back, his face draining of color until he looked like a wax figure. He snatched his hands away from me as if my skin had suddenly turned red hot. "Your Honor," Patterson stammered, his voice cracking like a teenager's. I didn't know. We were just..." Judge Sterling didn't even look at him. He didn't look at the deputies who were now backing away toward the walls, trying to make themselves invisible. He walked straight into the room, the tap 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 of his cane the only sound in the universe. He stopped in front of my father. Lawrence stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from water. The blood had left his face so completely that his skin looked gray. He looked at the judge, then at me, then back at the judge, terror dawning in his eyes as he realized the magnitude of his miscalculation. Vivian let out a small, strangled gasp. Her hands, which had been crossed smugly over her chest moments ago, went limp. Her designer Hermes bag slipped from her fingers and hit the floor with a heavy thud, spilling lipstick and credit cards across the tiles. She didn't move to pick it up. She couldn't move. She was paralyzed by the presence of a predator far larger than herself. Judge Sterling looked at Lawrence for a long, agonizing moment. Then he spoke, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in my chest. "Lawrence Adams, I see you are still bullying women. I thought we discussed this 20 years ago." Lawrence tried to speak, but only a squeak came out. "Judge Sterling, sir, this is a misunderstanding. We were just trying to help Keisha. She is unwell." "Unwell," the judge repeated, tasting the word like spoiled milk. He turned his head slowly to look at me. His expression softened the ice in his eyes, melting into a pool of profound sorrow and kindness. He stepped past my father, brushing against him as if he were nothing more than a piece of furniture, and came to stand directly in front of me. He reached out a large, warm hand and gently tilted my chin up, inspecting the bruise forming on my cheek where my mother had slapped me. "Did they do this to you, child?" he asked softly. I nodded, tears spilling over again, hot and fast. "Yes." He turned back to the room and the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Sheriff Patterson," the judge said, without raising his voice, "if you do not want to be directing traffic in the smallest parking lot in Georgia by tomorrow morning, you will remove your men from this house immediately. And you will take that locksmith with you. This is not a crime scene. It is a home invasion. And the only criminals I see are the ones wearing Italian loafers." Patterson didn't hesitate. He didn't ask for clarification. He didn't look at my father for confirmation. He signaled his deputies, and they scrambled out the door, nearly tripping over each other in their haste to escape the judge's line of sight. "Wait!" Chloe cried out, her voice shrill with panic. "You can't just send the police away. She attacked us. She is mentally unstable. She needs to be committed." Judge Sterling turned his gaze on Chloe. It was like watching a lion notice a buzzing fly. "And who might you be, young lady?" "I am Chloe Adams," she said, trying to muster some of her usual arrogance but failing miserably. "I am Darius's wife, and I know the law. You cannot interfere in a domestic dispute just because you know the suspect." "Know the suspect." The judge chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Young woman, I do not just know her. I am the executor of this estate." The words hit the room like a physical blow. "Executor." Lawrence grabbed the back of a chair to steady himself. Vivian let out a low moan. Darius, who had been silent until now, looked from the judge to his wife, his eyes wide with fear. "That means," Judge Sterling continued, stepping toward Chloe until she backed up against the wall, "that means I know exactly what is in the will. I know exactly who owns this house, and I know exactly who does not." He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a thick, folded document. He held it up for them to see. "This is a copy of the deed. It was filed this morning at 8 a.m. The transfer is complete. This house belongs to Keisha. Not to you, Lawrence. Not to you, Vivian. And certainly not to you, Mrs. Adams." He turned to my father. "Arthur told me you might try something like this, Lawrence. He told me you were desperate. He told me you were drowning in debt. But I never thought you would sink this low. Breaking into your own parents' house. Assaulting your own daughter. Trying to have her committed to an asylum just to get your hands on money you did not earn." "Judge, please," Lawrence begged, sweat beading on his forehead. "You have to understand. The business, we are going to lose everything." "You have already lost everything," the judge said coldly. "You lost your honor. You lost your dignity. And as of this moment, you have lost your daughter. He pointed his cane at the door. Get out, all of you, before I decide to call the state troopers and have you arrested for trespassing, assault, and attempted fraud. And unlike Sheriff Patterson, the troopers answer to me. Vivian finally found her voice. You can't do this, she screeched. I am her mother. I have rights. You have the right to remain silent, Judge. Sterling roared, his voice finally rising to a thunderous volume. And I suggest you exercise it before you incriminate yourself further. Now get out of my goddaughter's house. They ran. There was no dignity in their exit. Lawrence stumbled over the broken door frame. Vivian didn't even stop to pick up her spilled purse, she just left it there, her credit cards scattered like confetti. Darius grabbed Chloe's arm and dragged her out the door. I watched them go, watched them scramble into their luxury cars and peel out of the driveway like common criminals. When the last taillight disappeared around the bend, Judge Sterling turned back to me. His shoulders slumped slightly, the towering rage fading into a weary sadness. I am sorry I was late, Keisha, he said gently. I wanted to make sure the filing was recorded before I came. Your grandfather wanted to make sure there were no loopholes. He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and handed it to me. Wipe your eyes, child. You are safe now. They can't touch you. Not ever again. I took the handkerchief. It smelled of cedar and old paper. I wiped the blood and tears from my face. Thank you, I whispered. I thought I was alone. The judge smiled, a sad, knowing smile. Arthur knew they would come for you. He knew they would try to break you. That is why he didn't just leave you money, Keisha. He left you protection. He gestured to the leather briefcase his chauffeur had brought in and placed on the table. He left you answers. I looked at the briefcase. It was old, worn leather monogrammed with my grandfather's initials. What is in there? I asked. The judge sighed. The truth. About your father's business. About your mother's spending. About why they really hate you. It isn't because you are a gardener, Keisha. It isn't because you are a failure. He paused, looking me in the eye. It is because you are the only one who didn't know the secret that has been holding this family hostage for 30 years. I felt a chill run down my spine. What secret? Judge Sterling opened the briefcase. He pulled out a thick file bound with red string. The secret of where the money really came from. And the secret of who you really are. The silence that followed Judge Sterling's entrance was heavy enough to crush bones. For a moment, the only sound in the foyer was the ragged breathing of my mother and the soft, confident tap of the judge's cane against the marble floor. He moved past my father without even a glance, as if Lawrence were nothing more than a coat rack or a piece of unwanted furniture. My father's hand, which had been halfway extended for a greeting, dropped limply to his side. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a man who had just seen his own executioner. Judge Sterling did not stop until he was standing directly in front of me. He looked at the red marks on my wrists where the handcuffs had bitten into my skin. He looked at the bruise blooming on my cheekbone. His eyes, which were usually hard as flint behind his wire-rimmed glasses, softened into something that looked like heartbreak. He reached out a hand that was trembling slightly and cupped my face. His skin was warm and dry and smelled of old books and peppermint, just like my grandfather used to. I am so sorry, Keisha. The judge's voice was a low rumble that seemed to vibrate in the center of my chest. I should have been here sooner. Arthur made me promise. He made me swear on his life that I would not let them break you. He knew this day would come. He knew they would try to take everything from you the moment he was gone. I failed him by being late, but I will not fail him again. I looked up at him, my vision blurring with fresh tears. I had thought I was alone. I had thought my grandfather's protection ended when they lowered him into the ground. But he was still here. He had sent his champion. He had woven a safety net so strong that not even my family's greed could cut through it. Are you hurt, child? Judge Sterling asked, his thumb gently brushing away a tear that had escaped. Did they hurt you? I nodded, unable to speak. The relief was so intense it made my knees weak. Behind us, I heard my mother make a small, strangled noise. Judge Sterling. She began, her voice high and thin like a wire pulled too tight. You do not understand. Keisha is unwell. We are just trying to help her. She needs professional care. The judge did not turn around. He did not even acknowledge she had spoken. He kept his eyes locked on mine, as if I were the only person in the room who mattered. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a pristine white handkerchief. He pressed it into my hand, closing my fingers around it. Dry your eyes, he said softly. You are a Brooks. You are the granddaughter of Arthur Brooks. You do not cry in front of people who do not deserve your tears. Then he turned. The movement was slow, deliberate, and terrifying. He pivoted on his heel, his cane finding the floor with a sharp crack. He faced the room and the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. His gaze swept over my family. He looked at Darius, who was trying to hide the bronze statue behind his back. He looked at Chloe, who was frantically typing on her phone, likely trying to delete the libelous post she had just made. He looked at my mother, who was clutching her pearls as if they could protect her from the storm that was about to break. And then he looked at the police. Sheriff Patterson was sweating. Beads of perspiration were gathering on his forehead and running down his temple. He shifted his weight from foot to foot, his hand hovering near his belt, not knowing where to put it. The two deputies behind him looked like they wanted to phase through the wall and disappear. Judge Sterling took one step toward them. Just one step, but it felt like a mountain moving. Sheriff, he said, his voice deceptively calm. I want you to listen to me very carefully because I am only going to say this once. And your pension, your badge, and your freedom depend on you understanding every single word. Patterson swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. Now? Judge, we were just following protocol. Mr. Adams here said there was a disturbance. We have a duty to secure the scene. Secure the scene. Judge Sterling repeated the words, tasting like acid in his mouth. Is that what you call manhandling a grieving young woman in her own kitchen? Is that what you call threatening a homeowner with involuntary commitment on the word of a man who has 3 pending lawsuits for fraud against him? Lawrence made a noise of protest, but one look from the judge silenced him instantly. You entered this property without a warrant. Judge Sterling continued, his voice rising in volume and intensity. You laid hands on the legal owner of this estate based on the lies of people who are currently trespassing. You were about to drag an innocent woman out of her home in handcuffs without a shred of evidence that she had committed a crime. But she is crazy, Chloe blurted out from the corner. She thinks she owns the house. She is delusional. Judge Sterling's eyes snapped to Chloe. It was like a lion focusing on a gazelle. Young woman, if you speak again, I will hold you in contempt of court right here in this foyer. And I do not care that we are not in a courtroom. My authority does not stop at the courthouse steps. He turned back to Patterson. He reached into his inner pocket again and pulled out a folded document with a blue legal cover. He snapped it open, holding it up so everyone could see the official seal stamped in red ink at the bottom. This is the last will and testament of Arthur Brooks. It was filed with the probate court yesterday afternoon. It names Keisha Brooks as the sole heir and executor of the entire Brooks estate. The house, the land, the investments. Every single brick and blade of grass on this property belongs to her. He lowered the document and pointed a finger directly at the sheriff's chest. And this woman is not just the heir. She is my goddaughter. I held her at her christening. I promised Arthur I would watch over her. So hear me now, Sheriff. If you or your men ever dare to touch her again, if you ever step foot on this property without a warrant signed by me personally, if you ever so much as look at her the wrong way, I will rain down such legal hellfire on your department that you will be lucky if you can get a job as a mall security guard in Idaho. Patterson looked at the document, then at me, then at Lawrence. The realization of what he had almost done washed over him. He had almost arrested the goddaughter of the most powerful judge in the state. He had almost become an accomplice to a felony fraud. I will have your badge before lunch. The judge growled, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. I will launch a civil rights investigation into your department that will uncover every dirty favor you have ever done for Lawrence Adams. I will make sure the entire state knows you are nothing but a hired thug for a bankrupt con artist. Patterson held up his hands, palms out in surrender. Judge, please. We did not know. Mr. Adams told us. He said she was dangerous. We were lied to. Then leave, the judge roared, pointing at the door with his cane. Get out of this house. Take your men and get off this property. And if I see your cruiser anywhere near here again, I will issue the arrest warrants myself. The deputies did not wait for an order. They turned and bolted for the door, nearly tripping over each other in their haste to escape the suffocating pressure of the judge's anger. Patterson lingered for a second, looking at Lawrence with a mixture of anger and betrayal. You lied to me, Larry, he hissed. You told me this was a done deal. You told me she was crazy. Lawrence didn't answer. He couldn't. He was staring at the judge, paralyzed by the total collapse of his plan. Go, Patterson, the judge barked, before I change my mind about letting you walk out of here. The sheriff turned and ran. The heavy front door slammed shut behind them, leaving a ringing silence in the foyer. The flashing blue lights outside flickered against the walls for a moment longer, and then pulled away, fading into the distance. The threat was gone. The handcuffs were gone. The prospect of a padded cell and a drugged existence vanished as quickly as it had appeared. I looked at my family. They were still standing there, but they looked smaller now. Without the police to back them up, without the threat of institutional force, they were just three greedy people standing in a house that didn't belong to them. Vivian had dropped her handbag. Her contents, lipstick, compact credit cards, lay scattered on the floor. She stared at them as if she didn't know what they were. Chloe was pressed against the wall, her face pale, her arrogance replaced by pure terror. Darius looked like a child who had just realized the game was over and he had lost. Judge Sterling took a deep breath, composing himself. He adjusted his cuffs and turned to me. His anger evaporated the moment he looked at my face, replaced by that same deep protective warmth. Are you all right, Keisha? He asked gently. I nodded. I felt lightheaded. The adrenaline was crashing, leaving me shaky and weak. But I was safe. Thank you, I whispered. Thank you for coming. He smiled a sad, tired smile. Your grandfather knew Lawrence would try something like this. He knew your father was desperate. He told me to wait until the will was filed. He wanted to make sure there was no ambiguity, no loopholes. He wanted to make sure that when I walked through that door, I had the full weight of the law behind me. He turned to face my parents. His demeanor changed again. It wasn't the fiery rage he had shown the police. It was something colder. It was the disdain of a man looking at something rotting. Now he said, his voice flat and hard, let us discuss the terms of your surrender. Because make no mistake, this is not a negotiation. This is an eviction. And unlike the one you planned for Keisha, this one is going to stick. Judge Sterling stood in the center of the foyer, like a monolith of justice, his presence filling the space that the police had vacated. The silence that followed the slamming of the front door was not peaceful. It was the vacuum before an explosion. My parents were still huddled together near the wall, their postures shifting from terrified submission to a desperate scrambling attempt at damage control. Lawrence straightened his tie, a futile gesture of dignity that looked pathetic given the circumstances. He cleared his throat, a wet, nervous sound. Judge, please, you have to understand the context here. Lawrence began, his voice taking on that oily, persuasive tone he used when trying to close a business deal that was going south. We know how this looks. It looks bad. We admit that. But you are only seeing one side of the story. Keisha is... She is a troubled girl. She has always been jealous of our success. She manipulated Arthur in his final days. She twisted his mind against us. Vivian chimed in, her voice, trembling but gaining strength as she latched onto her husband's narrative. Yes, Marcus, please listen. Arthur was senile. He did not know what he was signing. Keisha took advantage of him. She is a con artist. A very good one, but a con artist nonetheless. We were just trying to protect the family legacy from a girl who would squander it on landscaping projects. We are the victims here. I felt a surge of rage so hot it almost blinded me. Even now, standing in the wreckage of their failed coup, they were still lying. They were still trying to paint me as the villain. I opened my mouth to scream to defend myself, but Judge Sterling held up a single hand. He did not look at them. He looked at me. He reached down to the leather briefcase that sat on the floor beside him. He clicked the brass latches open with a snap that sounded like a pistol hammer cocking. He reached inside and pulled out a thick binder bound in heavy black leather. It was not a legal brief. It looked like a ledger. Arthur was many things, Judge Sterling said, his voice calm and conversational as if he were discussing the weather. He was a brilliant businessman, a loving grandfather, a pillar of this community. But do you know what he hated most in this world, Lawrence? My father did not answer. He was staring at the black binder, his eyes wide with a dawning horror. He hated a thief, the judge answered for him. He walked over to me and placed the heavy binder in my hands. It felt dense, solid, like a brick of gold or a loaded weapon. He called this his accounting, Sterling said softly. He spent the last 2 years of his life compiling it. He hired forensic accountants. He hired private investigators. He wanted you to know exactly who you were dealing with, Keisha. He wanted you to know that your poverty was not an accident. It was a robbery. I opened the binder. The first page was a summary sheet typed on my grandfather's personal stationery. The date at the top was from 3 months ago, just weeks before the car accident. I turned the page, my breath caught in my throat. It was a bank statement, but not just any statement. It was a transaction record for a shell company called LVA Holdings. I scanned the columns. Deposits, massive deposits. $50,000, $12,000, $100,000. All transferring out of Brooks Industries, my grandfather's company, and into LVA Holdings. And the signatories on the LVA account were Lawrence and Vivian Adams. I looked up at my parents. They were not looking at me. They were looking at the floor, at the walls, anywhere but at the evidence in my hands. $5 million, I whispered. The number felt impossible in my mouth. Judge Sterling nodded grimly. Over 10 years. They did not just borrow money, Keisha. They siphoned it. They set up fake vendor accounts. They billed the company for consulting services that were never rendered. They treated your grandfather's life work like their personal piggy bank. I flipped through the pages. There were receipts. Receipts for first-class flights to Milan. Receipts for the renovation of their kitchen. Receipts for the Porsche that Lawrence drove. Receipts for the designer wardrobe Vivian was currently wearing. You told me we were broke, I said, my voice rising. When I needed money for college, you said the business was struggling. When I begged you for help with Grandma's medical bills because the insurance would not cover the night nurse, you said you were tapped out. We were broke, Vivian shrieked, her composure cracking. It costs money to maintain our position, Keisha. You do not understand the pressure, the society dues, the galas. We had to look the part. If people knew we were struggling, Lawrence would have lost his clients. We did it for the family. You did it for your vanity, I shouted, slamming the binder shut. You stole $5 million from your own father while his wife was dying of dementia. You let me sleep on the floor by her bed because you said you could not afford help while you were stealing enough money to staff a private hospital wing. Lawrence looked at the judge pleadingly. Marcus, we intended to pay it back. It was a loan. An unauthorized loan maybe, but we were going to fix it. The market just turned against us. Arthur knew, Judge Sterling said coldly. He knew every dime you took. He let it slide for a long time because you were his son. He hoped you would find your moral compass. But then he found out about the house. The house, Lawrence whispered, and his legs finally gave out. He sank onto the bottom step of the staircase, his head in his hands. I looked at the judge, confused. What about the house? Turn to the red tab in the back, the judge instructed. I flipped to the back of the binder. There was a copy of a document, a deed of trust, a mortgage agreement. It was dated 6 months ago. It was a loan for $500,000 secured against Cascade Manor. But Grandpa owned this house outright, I said, scanning the paper. There was no mortgage. There is now, the judge said. Or there would be if the bank knew the truth. Look at the signature, Keisha. I looked at the bottom of the page. There was my grandfather's signature. Arthur Brooks. It looked shaky, a little uneven, but it was his name. Except it wasn't. I looked closer. The loop on the B was too wide. The slant was wrong. I knew my grandfather's handwriting better than my own. I had read his letters 1,000 times. This was a forgery. A good one, but a forgery. And below it as a witness was the signature of Darius Adams. I looked at my brother. Darius was pressed against the wall, trying to make himself invisible. He looked like a cornered rat. You forged Grandpa's signature, I said, the words tasting like ash. You took out a second mortgage on this house, on their home, without them knowing. Darius licked his lips. I had a debt. A bad debt. In Vegas. They were going to hurt me, Keisha. You do not know these people. I needed the cash fast. I was going to pay it off before Grandpa found out. I just needed one big win. One big win, Judge Sterling repeated with disgust. You gambled away $500,000 of equity in a house that did not belong to you. And when you realized you could not pay it back, you and your parents hatched this plan. Get Keisha committed. Get power of attorney. Sell the house quickly to cover the fraud before the bank realized the signature was fake. Chloe let out a sharp gasp. She turned to Darius, her eyes wide with horror. You told me that money came from a bonus. You told me you made partner. You spent that money on my ring. She looked down at the massive diamond on her finger. The ring she had flashed in my face 12 times. The ring she said proved she was better than me. It was bought with stolen money. It was bought with fraud. You are all criminals, I said, my voice trembling with the sheer weight of the betrayal. This is not just family drama. This is racketeering. This is embezzlement. This is forgery. Judge Sterling stepped forward until he was looming over Lawrence. Arthur came to me 2 weeks before he died. He showed me this binder. He was heartbroken, Lawrence. He was not angry, he was devastated. He realized that he had raised a son who would steal the roof from over his head. He asked me what to do. I told him to go to the police. I told him to have you arrested then and there. Lawrence looked up, tears streaming down his face. Why didn't he? Because he loved you, the judge said, and his voice cracked with the tragedy of it. God help him, he still loved you. He could not bear the thought of his son in prison. So he made a new will. He left everything to Keisha because he knew she was the only one with the integrity to protect the legacy. And he gave me this binder as an insurance policy. He said, Marcus, keep this safe. If they accept the will, if they walk away and leave Keisha alone, burn it. Let them keep their secrets. But if they come for her, if they try to hurt her, if they try to take what is hers, you give it to her, and you let her decide. The room was silent. The weight of my grandfather's mercy hung in the air. Even in the face of their theft, he had tried to protect them. He had given them one last chance to be decent, one last chance to accept their lot and walk away with their freedom, if not their fortune. And they had blown it. They had blown it because they were too greedy, too arrogant, too filled with hate for the daughter they deemed unworthy. I looked at the binder in my hands. It was heavy. It was the weight of their lives. With this evidence, I could send them all to prison. I could send Lawrence and Vivian away for embezzlement. I could send Darius away for bank fraud and forgery. I could destroy them completely. Judge Sterling looked at me. The choice is yours, Keisha. It is all there. The district attorney is a friend of mine. One phone call and this binder is on his desk. One phone call and the indictments start rolling down. Vivian threw herself at my feet. It was a pathetic display. She grabbed my hand, weeping hysterical tears. Keisha, please, please do not do this. We are your family. Think about the scandal. Think about your father. He is an old man, he will not survive prison. We will go away. We will leave Atlanta. We will never bother you again. Just please burn it. Burn it like your grandfather wanted. He wanted it burned if you left me alone, I said, pulling my hand away from her grasp. But you didn't leave me alone. You broke down my door. You slapped me. You tried to lock me in a psych ward. I looked at Darius, who was crying silently against the wall. I looked at Chloe, who was staring at her ring, as if it were a poisonous spider. I looked at Lawrence, a broken man on the stairs. They were not powerful. They were not elite. They were just criminals in expensive clothes. And for the first time I saw them clearly. Not as giants I could never please, but as small, broken people who had destroyed themselves. I closed the binder. The snap of the cover was loud in the quiet room. I am not going to burn it, I said. Vivian wailed a sound of pure despair. But I am not going to call the DA, not yet. Lawrence looked up, hope flaring in his eyes. I am going to keep it, I said. I am going to put it in a safe deposit box that only I can access. And this is going to be the leash that you wear for the rest of your lives. I walked over to the broken door and pointed outside. You are going to leave. You are going to sign a document admitting to everything in this binder. A confession. And if you ever come near me again, if you ever say my name in public, if you ever try to contact my clients or my friends, if you ever step foot within 10 miles of this house, I will release it. I will send copies to the police, to the news, to your country club, to every single person in Atlanta. I looked at Vivian. You care about your image, mother. You care about what people think. Well, now you get to keep your image. But you lose the money. You lose the house. And you lose me. You get to play the grieving parents of the estranged daughter. But you will know. Every single day you wake up, you will know that I hold the sword over your neck. And I will not hesitate to drop it. Judge Sterling nodded, a small smile touching his lips. That sounds like justice to me. Get out, I said. And take your trash with you. I kicked the broken pieces of the crystal vase toward them. They scrambled to leave. There were no more threats, no more posturing. They were beaten. Lawrence helped Vivian up. Darius wouldn't even look at me. Chloe ran to her car without waiting for her husband. As they drove away, disappearing down the long driveway of Cascade Manor, I felt the tension leave my body. I was tired. I was bruised. My front door was broken and my family was gone. But I was standing in my house, my grandfather's house. And I held the keys to the kingdom. Judge Sterling put an arm around me. You did good, kid. Arthur would be proud. I looked at the binder in my hands, the weapon that had saved me. I think he would be too, I said. I turned and walked back into the house, stepping over the debris, ready to clean up the mess they had made, ready to start my life, ready to build something real, something that wasn't built on lies and theft. I was Keisha Brooks, and I was finally home. I opened the black binder again. The sound of the heavy leather cover hitting the table was not loud, but in the terrified silence of the foyer, it sounded like a judge's gavel sealing a death sentence. I ran my hand over the crisp white pages filled with columns of numbers and dates and signatures. This was not just paper. This was ammunition. This was the autopsy of my family's greed laid out in black and white. Judge Sterling stood silently by the door, his arms crossed over his chest, watching me with a quiet pride. He was letting me handle this. He had provided the sword, but he was letting me swing it. I looked at Chloe. My sister-in-law was pressed against the wall near the coat rack, her face a mask of rapidly crumbling arrogance. She was clutching her designer handbag like a shield, her eyes darting between me and her husband Darius. She knew something was coming. She could smell the smoke, but she had not seen the fire yet. Chloe, I said, my voice calm and conversational. Step forward. There are some things in here you need to see. Things your husband forgot to mention when he was buying you that diamond ring with stolen money. Chloe hesitated. She looked at Darius. Darius shook his head frantically, his eyes pleading with her not to move, pleading with me to stop. "Do not listen to her, Chloe," he stammered, sweat dripping down his forehead. "She is lying. She is trying to divide us. We are a team, baby. A team." I repeated with a dry laugh. "Is that what you call it, Darius? A team?" I looked down at page 42 of the forensic report. Interesting. Because according to this, you have been using Chloe's social security number to open lines of credit without her knowledge for the past 18 months. Chloe's head snapped toward her husband. What did she say? Darius turned a sickly shade of gray. Nothing. It is nothing. Is just paperwork errors. I continued reading, my finger tracing the line items. A credit card opened in Chloe Adams' name maxed out at $50,000. Used primarily at the Bellagio in Las Vegas and for online sports betting. A personal loan for $20,000 taken out in Chloe Adams' name defaulted 3 months ago. And here is the best part. A second mortgage application on your condo forged with Chloe's signature pending approval. Chloe walked over to the table. She moved like a sleepwalker. She looked down at the documents I was pointing to. She saw the signatures. She saw the dates. She saw her own financial ruin printed in high definition. Her hands started to shake. She picked up a page, bringing it closer to her face. Her eyes scanned the numbers. "You opened a credit card in my name," she whispered. Her voice was trembling, but there was a razor blade hidden in the tremor. Darius tried to reach for her. "Baby, listen. I was going to pay it back. I had a system. Ooh. I just needed a little more time. The deal with the house was supposed to cover everything." "The deal with the house?" I interrupted. "You mean the theft of my house? You were going to use my inheritance to pay off your gambling debts before the bank came for Chloe's condo." I turned the page again. "And let us not forget your job, Darius. Chloe, do you remember when Darius told you he was promoted to executive vice president of Brooks Industries last year? That was why you bought the new Mercedes, right? To celebrate the promotion." Chloe nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving the paper. "He was not promoted," I said. "He was fired." The silence that followed was absolute. Even Vivian stopped her quiet sobbing. "Grandpa fired him 18 months ago," I continued, "for embezzlement. He caught Darius charging personal expenses to the company account. Escorts, hotel rooms, Rolex watches. Grandpa didn't want to humiliate him publicly, so he let Darius pretend he was still working. He let him keep the title for appearances, but he cut off the salary." I looked at my brother, who was now leaning against the wall looking like he wanted to vomit. "That salary you thought he was bringing home Chloe. That was Grandpa giving him an allowance out of pity. An allowance he stopped the day he died. Darius has been unemployed and insolvent for nearly 2 years. He is not a vice president. He is a charity case. And now that the charity is gone, he is just a thief with a mountain of debt that has your name on it." Chloe dropped the paper. It fluttered to the floor, landing softly on the marble. She turned to Darius. Her face was unrecognizable. The mask of the bored socialite was gone. In its place was the face of a woman who realized she had been conned. "You lied to me," she said, her voice rising with every word. "You told me you were running the company. You told me we were rich. I quit my job at the firm because you said we didn't need the money." Darius held out his hands, palms up, in a pathetic gesture of surrender. "Chloe, please. I did it for us. I wanted you to have the best. I was going to fix it. Once we got Keisha out of the house, once we sold the estate, we would have millions. We would be fine." "You stole my identity," Chloe screamed. "You ruined my credit score. You jeopardized my law license. Do you know what the Bar Association does to lawyers with massive defaulted debt and fraud allegations? They disbar them, Darius. You destroyed my life." "Chloe, please," Vivian interjected, stepping forward, her maternal instinct finally kicking in to defend her golden boy. "Do not shout at him. He was under a lot of pressure. He made mistakes, but he loves you. We can work this out. We just need to convince Keisha to share." "Shut up, Vivian." Chloe snapped, whipping around to face my mother. Do not speak to me. You knew, didn't you? You knew he was fired. You knew he was broke. And you let me marry him. You let me tie my financial future to an anchor because you wanted a trophy daughter-in-law to show off at the club. You are just as bad as he is. She turned back to Darius. Her eyes were dry now, burning with a cold, focused hatred. I am not working this out. There is no we anymore. She took a step closer to him. Darius flinched, expecting a scream. But Chloe didn't scream. She swung. Her hand connected with his face with a sound that was louder than the gunshot crack of the door breaking earlier. It was a slap filled with the fury of a woman scorned, a woman defrauded, and a woman who had just realized she had wasted 5 years of her life on a lie. Darius stumbled back, clutching his cheek, staring at her in shock. You are a liar, Chloe spat. You are a fraud. And you are a loser. I married a vice president. I did not marry a thief living on an allowance from his grandpa. She reached down and grabbed her left hand. She yanked the massive diamond ring off her finger. The ring bought with stolen money. The ring that was a lie. She threw it at him. It hit him in the chest and bounced away, skittering across the floor to rest near the broken vase. I am filing for divorce in the morning, she announced, her voice icy and professional. I am also filing a fraud report with the credit bureaus and the police. I am going to testify against you, Darius. I am going to tell them everything. The forgery, the identity theft, the conspiracy to defraud Keisha. I will not go down for your crimes. I am protecting my assets and I am protecting myself. Darius looked at her, his eyes pleading. Chloe. Baby, do not do this. They will put me in jail. Good, Chloe said. At least in jail you won't be able to open any more credit cards in my name. She turned to me. She didn't apologize. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She just looked at me with a new respect born of fear. Keisha, she said, I am leaving. I am taking my car. And I am never coming back to this family again. You should ruin them. They deserve it. She walked out the front door, stepping over the splintered wood without looking back. We heard her engine roar to life and tires screech as she sped away, leaving her husband and his parents standing in the wreckage of their deception. Darius slid down the wall until he was sitting on the floor, his head in his hands, sobbing like a child. My wife, he moaned. She left me. She is going to call the cops. I looked at him, and I felt nothing. No pity, no sadness, just a cold sense of completion. I closed the black binder. The snap of the latch seemed to wake Lawrence and Vivian from their trance. They looked at Darius, then at me. It is over. I said, my voice filling the empty space left by Chloe's departure. The lies are over. The games are over. I looked at the grandfather clock in the corner. It was 7:15. You have 30 minutes, I said. Vivian blinked, confusion clouding her tear-filled eyes. 30 minutes for what? To get out, I said. To get your things and get out of my house. Lawrence stepped forward, his hands shaking. Keisha, be reasonable. Where will we go? This is our home. We have lived here for... You lived here as guests, I cut him off. You lived here because Grandpa was too kind to kick you out even when you were stealing from him. But I am not Grandpa. And you are not guests. You are intruders. I walked over to the front door and pulled it open wide, letting the morning sun stream in, illuminating the dust and the broken glass. You have 30 minutes to pack your personal effects. I continued, my voice hard as steel. Clothes, toiletries. That is it. No furniture, no art, no silver, no electronics. Everything in this house was bought with my grandfather's money, which means it belongs to me. If I see you trying to take so much as a spoon, I will call Judge Sterling back here, and we will skip the eviction and go straight to the arrest. But we have nowhere to go, Vivian wailed. Our house. The bank took it last month. We have been staying here because we have no other options. I remembered the night they kicked me out. I remembered standing in the rain with my garbage bags full of clothes while Vivian screamed at me from the dry warmth of the porch. I remembered begging them for a place to stay and being told I was dead to them. That sounds like a personal problem, I said, echoing the words Darius had said to me when I asked for help with tuition years ago. Maybe you can stay at a hotel, or a shelter, or maybe you can sleep in that luxury car you bought with stolen funds. Darius looked up from the floor, his face wet with tears and snot. You cannot do this, Keisha. We are family. Family does not steal $5 million, I said. Family does not try to lock their sister in a psych ward. Family does not forge signatures. You stopped being my family the moment you decided my life was worth less than your lifestyle. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and set a timer. 29 minutes, I said. Lawrence looked at me, and for the first time he saw me. He didn't see the daughter he could bully. He didn't see the landscape architect he could look down on. He saw the woman who held his fate in her hands, and he saw that I would not blink. He grabbed Vivian's arm. Come on, Vivian. Vivian resisted, digging her heels in. No, I am not leaving. This is my house. I was the lady of this house. You were a parasite, Lawrence hissed, dragging her toward the stairs. Move, Vivian, before she calls the police back. Do you want to die in prison? They scrambled up the stairs. It was a pathetic sight. The great Lawrence and Vivian Adams running like rats on a sinking ship. Darius pulled himself up from the floor, wiping his face on his sleeve. He looked at me one last time with a mixture of hatred and fear, and then he ran after them. I stood in the foyer watching the timer on my phone count down. 20 minutes. I heard banging upstairs, drawers being ripped open, suitcases being thrown around, the sounds of a life being dismantled in panic. 15 minutes. I saw Judge Sterling watching me from the kitchen doorway. He gave me a small nod of approval. He didn't interfere. He knew this was something I had to do myself. This was my exorcism. 10 minutes. They started coming down. They were dragging suitcases bulging at the seams. Vivian was wearing 3 coats layered on top of each other, trying to smuggle out her wardrobe on her back. Lawrence was carrying a box of what looked like watches. I stepped in front of Lawrence. Open the box, I said. He hesitated. Open it. He opened the lid. Inside were my grandfather's vintage watches. Patek Philippe, Rolex, Cartier. Leave them, I said. But they were my father's, Lawrence stammered. And he left them to me, I said. Put the box on the table. Lawrence's hands shook as he placed the box on the foyer table. He looked like he was physically in pain, separating from the gold. 5 minutes. Get out, I said, pointing to the open door. They filed past me. Vivian was sobbing loudly, a performance for an audience of 1. Darius wouldn't meet my eyes. Lawrence looked like a ghost. They dragged their suitcases down the front steps and onto the gravel driveway. They loaded them into the 2 cars that were still parked there. The cars that the bank would probably be repossessing by the end of the week. 1 minute. I walked to the doorway. They were in their car's engine starting. I looked at the timer. 0. I stepped back inside and slammed the heavy oak door. The sound rang through the house, final and absolute. I locked the deadbolt. I turned around and leaned against the door, sliding down until I was sitting on the floor. The house was quiet. The shouting was gone. The threats were gone. The police were gone. It was just me. And the silence was beautiful. I looked up at the crystal chandelier hanging above me. It was dusty. I would have to clean it. I looked at the walls. The wallpaper Chloe hated was peeling in the corner. I would have to fix it. I looked at the floor. The shattered vase lay in a pool of light. I would have to sweep it up. There was so much work to do. But for the first time in my life, it was my work. It was my house. It was my life. And they were never coming back. The silence in the foyer following Chloe's departure was thick enough to choke on. My mother stood amidst the ruins of her social aspirations, watching the taillights of her daughter-in-law's car fade away. Then she turned her gaze back to me. Her face crumpled. It was a transformation so sudden and so dramatic it would have won an award on Broadway. The rage and the arrogance dissolved instantly, replaced by a mask of tragic maternal suffering. Tears that seemed to appear on command spilled over her perfectly made-up lashes, ruining her foundation. She took a step toward me, her hands outstretched, trembling like a leaf in a storm. "Keisha, baby," she wailed, her voice cracking with a sorrow that almost sounded real. "How can you be so cruel? I am your mother. I gave you life. I carried you for 9 months. I nursed you. I sacrificed my body and my youth for you. And this is how you repay me? By throwing me out on the street like a stray dog. Have you no heart? Have you no memory of the love we shared?" I watched her performance with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing a specimen under a microscope. It was fascinating, really. For 28 years, this guilt trip had been her ultimate weapon. Whenever I established a boundary, whenever I asked for affection, whenever I tried to be my own person, she would pull this trigger. She would weaponize her biology to demand my submission. But the chamber was empty. The weapon did not fire. "I am not throwing you out on the street, Mother," I said, my voice flat and devoid of the emotion she was desperate to provoke. "You have a car. You have friends. Or at least you did until Chloe posted on Facebook. You will figure it out. You always do." Vivian dropped to her knees. She actually fell to the marble floor, clasping her hands together in a pose of prayer. "Please, Keisha, do not do this. I am begging you. We are family. Blood is thicker than water. You cannot turn your back on the people who raised you. Where is your compassion? Where is the sweet little girl I raised?" "The sweet little girl you raised died in Terminal 3 of Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport," I said, the memory rising up in my throat like bile. Vivian blinked, her sobbing pausing for a fraction of a second. "What are you talking about?" I took a step closer to her, looking down at the woman who had birthed me, but never loved me. "Do not pretend you do not remember, Mother. I was 16 years old. We were supposed to go to family therapy in New York. A last-ditch effort to fix us before you sent me to boarding school. But when we got to the gate, the flight was overbooked. There was only one seat left in first class." I watched the recognition dawn in her eyes. The memory she had buried under layers of denial and self-justification was clawing its way to the surface. "You looked at me," I continued, my voice hard as flint, "and you looked at the ticket agent. And then your phone rang. It was Chloe. She had just gotten engaged to Darius, and she wanted to celebrate at a spa in Manhattan. She had booked a suite. And you had to be there. You had to be part of the celebration." "Keisha, that was a misunderstanding," Vivian stammered, scrambling backward on her knees. "I thought there was another flight." "You knew there were no other flights," I cut her off. "It was a holiday weekend. You took the upgrade. You got on that plane. You left your 16-year-old daughter alone in the busiest airport in the world with $40 and no return ticket. You told me to wait for standby." I leaned down until my face was level with hers. "I waited for 18 hours, Mother. 18 hours sitting on my suitcase, watching families hug each other, watching fathers buy their daughters dinner, watching mothers hold their sleeping children. I slept on a bench near the garbage cans. And when I finally got a flight home 2 days later, you were not there to pick me up. You were still at the spa. You sent an Uber." Vivian covered her face with her hands, sobbing into her palms. "I am sorry," she muffled. "I am so sorry. I made a mistake." "It wasn't a mistake," I said, straightening up. "It was a choice. Just like stealing from Grandpa was a choice. Just like trying to commit me to an asylum today was a choice. And now I am making a choice. I am choosing me. I am choosing my peace. And my peace requires your absence." I looked at my watch. "You have 19 minutes left." Lawrence, who had been watching this exchange with a look of growing horror, suddenly seemed to realize that emotional manipulation was not working. His wife's tears were useless. The guilt trip had failed. And like a cornered animal, he reverted to the only other tactic he knew: aggression. He stepped forward, his face flushing red again, the veins in his neck bulging against his collar.
Now you listen here, you ungrateful little brat. I have had enough of this melodrama. This is my house. I grew up here. My father built this empire. And I will be damned if I let you steal it because of some childhood grudge. He pointed a shaking finger at Judge Sterling. And you, Marcus. You think you can come in here and wave your cane around and scare me. I know people. I have lawyers who can tie this estate up in probate for the next 20 years. I will sue you for everything you are worth. I will sue Keisha for elder abuse. I will sue for undue influence. I will file so many motions and injunctions that she will be an old woman before she sees a dime of this money. He turned back to me, his eyes wild. You want a war, Keisha? I will give you a war. I will burn this legacy to the ground before I let you have it. You think you are smart. You think you are tough. You are nothing but a gardener. And I will bury you. Judge Sterling sighed. It was a sound of profound disappointment. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. He tapped the screen once, then held it up. Lawrence, he said, his voice calm and weary. Did you really think Arthur didn't anticipate this? Did you think the man who built a fortune from scratch didn't know his own son? What are you talking about? Lawrence snapped. I am talking about the district attorney, Judge, Sterling said. I just sent him the digital file of the black binder, and I also sent him the recording of the last 10 minutes. Lawrence froze. What recording? My phone has been recording since I walked in the door, the judge said pleasantly. I have you on tape threatening the heir. I have you admitting that your wife's tears are a performance. And now I have you threatening malicious litigation to defraud the estate. He put the phone back in his pocket. The DA is already drafting the indictments, Lawrence. For embezzlement. For fraud. And now thanks to your little outburst for extortion. He was on the fence about arresting you today. He thought maybe, just maybe, you were a grieving son who made a mistake, but I think this recording will clarify things for him. Sterling took a step toward my father, towering over him. So here is your new reality, Lawrence. You can leave right now. You can get in your car and drive away and pray that your lawyers are better than the ones you hired to forge those mortgage documents, or you can stay here and keep threatening us. And if you choose option 2, I will call the state troopers back. And this time they won't just escort you off the property, they will take you out in irons. He looked Lawrence in the eye. So the question is simple. Do you want to leave here in an Uber, or do you want to leave in a prison transport van? Because I am very happy to arrange the latter. Lawrence looked at the judge. He looked at the phone in the judge's pocket. The fight drained out of him like water from a cracked glass. His shoulders slumped. His arrogance evaporated, leaving behind only a small, scared old man who had gambled everything and lost. He didn't say a word. He just turned to Vivian. Get up, he muttered. Vivian looked up, her mascara running down her cheeks in black streaks. But Lawrence, the house is gone, he hissed, grabbing her arm and hauling her to her feet. It is over, Vivian. We have to go, now. He looked at Darius, who was still sitting on the floor staring at nothing. Darius, move. Darius stood up slowly. He looked at me, and for a second I thought he might apologize. I thought he might say something to bridge the chasm between us. But he didn't. He just looked at me with a mixture of fear and resentment, and then looked away. They started to move. They walked toward the stairs, defeated, broken, and stripped of their power. I watched them go, and I felt nothing. No triumph, no joy, just a quiet, heavy relief. The monster under the bed was gone. The boogeyman was real, but he was leaving. 10 minutes later, they came back down. They were carrying 4 suitcases between them. That was it. That was the sum total of their lives in this house. Clothes, toiletries, a few personal items. Vivian was wearing a fur coat despite the warmth of the Atlanta morning, trying to salvage some shred of her dignity. Lawrence was carrying 2 bags, breathing heavy. Darius trailed behind them, holding a gym bag, his head down. They walked to the front door. I did not move out of the way. I stood my ground, forcing them to walk around me, forcing them to acknowledge that I was the anchor and they were the drift. Vivian paused at the threshold.
She looked back at the chandelier, at the winding staircase, at the life she was leaving behind. She looked at me. "I hope you are happy," she whispered. "I am not happy, Mother," I said. "I am safe. And that is better." She flinched and walked out into the bright sunlight. Lawrence followed, not looking back. Darius was the last one. He paused at the door. "Good luck with the garden, sis," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. And then he was gone. I walked to the doorway and watched them. They dragged their heavy suitcases down the steps, the wheels clattering loudly on the stone. They looked small against the backdrop of the massive estate. They looked like tourists who had overstayed their welcome. But as they reached the driveway, they stopped. There was a crowd. During the hour that the drama had unfolded inside, the neighborhood had woken up. The police sirens, the shouting, the arrival of the judge's Bentley, it had all drawn attention. But it was Chloe's post that had really done it. Chloe had sent out the bat signal to destroy me. She had alerted the community. She had told everyone that there was a crisis at Cascade Manor. But she had underestimated the grapevine. While we were inside arguing, the truth had started to leak out. Maybe it was the locksmith talking at the coffee shop. Maybe it was the neighbors who had seen the judge arrive. Maybe it was just the fact that in a tight-knit community, people know who the real villains are. Mrs. Gable was there, standing by her mailbox in her gardening gloves. Mr. Henderson, the attorney, was there watching from his car. The head of the homeowners association was there with her phone out. And they were not looking at me with disgust. They were looking at my parents. They saw the broken door, broken. They saw the suitcases. They saw the look of guilt plastered on Lawrence's face. And they saw me standing in the doorway with Judge Sterling beside me. The narrative flipped in an instant. The image of the grieving, confused parents crumbled when faced with the reality of them being evicted by the highest judge in the state. Lawrence tried to hold his head high. He tried to walk to his car with dignity. But then Mrs. Gable shouted out, "Hey, Lawrence! Is it true you stole from Arthur?" The question hung in the air. Lawrence flinched. He walked faster. Vivian tried to put on her sunglasses to hide her face, but her hands were shaking too much. She dropped them on the driveway. She bent to pick them up, and her fur coat dragged in the dust. "Shame on you," someone else yelled. It was the woman from the Botanical Society. "Shame on you, Vivian. After everything Arthur did for you." Phones were raised. Cameras were flashing. The very people whose approval my parents craved more than oxygen were now documenting their walk of shame. They were recording the fall of the House of Adams. Darius threw his bag into the trunk of his car and got in, slamming the door. He didn't wait for his parents. He started the engine and reversed out, narrowly missing Mrs. Gable, almost hitting the brick pillar of the gate. He sped away, leaving his parents behind. Lawrence and Vivian loaded their bags into Lawrence's Porsche. It was a tight fit. The luxury sports car wasn't designed for moving day. They had to shove the expensive leather luggage into the back seat. It was undignified. It was messy. It was the perfect ending to their facade. Lawrence got into the driver's seat. Vivian got into the passenger side. They didn't look at each other. They sat there for a moment, two people trapped in a glass cage of their own making, surrounded by a jury of their peers. Lawrence started the car. He drove slowly down the driveway, navigating through the crowd of neighbors who parted like the Red Sea, but not out of respect, out of revulsion. I watched them go. I watched the Porsche turn left out of the gate and disappear down the street. I watched the dust settle in their wake. The neighbors looked up at the house. They looked at me. Mrs. Gable gave me a small, tentative wave. I nodded back. I didn't smile. I didn't need their approval either. I just needed them to witness the truth. Judge Sterling stepped up beside me. He placed a hand on my shoulder. "It is done," he said. "Yes," I said, taking a deep breath of the fresh morning air. "It is done." I looked out over the estate. The sun was fully up now, illuminating the sprawling lawns, the ancient oaks, the rose garden that needed tending. It was beautiful. It was majestic. And for the first time in my life, it didn't feel like a museum or a fortress. It felt like a blank canvas. I looked down from the balcony at the empty driveway. The silence was not empty, it was full of possibility. I turned to Judge Sterling. "Would you like some coffee?" I asked. "I think I can finally make a fresh pot." He smiled, and for the first time that day, his eyes crinkled with genuine joy. "I would love that, Keisha. And then we have work to do. We have a foundation to run. And I believe you have some landscaping to redesign." I looked back one last time at the gate, where my family had vanished. "Goodbye," I whispered. And then I turned my back on the past and walked into my future. 3 months is not a long time in the grand scheme of history, but it is an eternity when you are falling from the top of the world to the bottom of the barrel. For my parents, that fall was not just a change in address, it was a complete dismantling of their reality. The apartment complex was called The Pines, but there were no pine trees. There was only a parking lot filled with rusted sedans and a dumpster that smelled of rotting garbage in the Georgia heat. Inside Unit 4B, the air conditioner rattled with a death rattle that matched the cough Lawrence had developed since losing his health insurance. The walls were thin enough to hear the neighbors' argument about money, which was ironic, considering that was the only conversation happening inside my parents' apartment, too. Vivian sat at a folding table that wobbled every time she touched it. She was staring at a stack of job applications for retail positions. The woman who had once spent $500 on a lunch at the country club was now trying to figure out how to explain a 30-year gap in her employment history to a manager at a department store. Her designer clothes were gone sold to a consignment shop for pennies on the dollar to pay for the security deposit on this place. She was wearing a t-shirt she had bought at a thrift store, and her hair, which used to be perfectly dyed and blown out, was showing gray roots that seemed to spread daily like a fungus. Lawrence sat on the lumpy sofa staring at the small television. He wasn't really watching it. He was watching his life replay in his mind, trying to find the moment where he could have fixed it. But there was no fix. The audit Judge Sterling had threatened had happened. The IRS did not care about family legacy. They cared about the $2 million in unpaid taxes Lawrence had hidden in offshore accounts. They had seized everything: the cars, the accounts, the remaining jewelry Vivian had tried to hide in a shoebox. He was a pariah. The phone calls to his old golf buddies went straight to voicemail. The emails to his former business partners bounced back. In the tight-knit world of Atlanta's black elite, reputation was currency, and Lawrence was bankrupt. He walked down the street and people crossed to the other side, not out of fear, but out of the kind of embarrassment you feel when you see something dead on the side of the road. But the silence in the apartment was broken by the news report on the TV. Breaking news in the fraud trial of Darius Adams, the reporter said, her voice cheerful and professional. Vivian looked up, her eyes hollow. Lawrence turned the volume up with a remote that was held together by tape. On the screen was a sketch of a courtroom. And there was Darius. He was not wearing his custom suits. He was wearing an orange jumpsuit that washed out his complexion. He looked small. He looked terrified. And on the witness stand in the sketch was Chloe. My former sister-in-law had not just divorced Darius, she had annihilated him. She had turned state's witness with a vengeance that terrified even the prosecutors. She had saved every text message, every email, every forged receipt. She testified about the credit cards he opened in her name. She testified about the fake job title. She testified about the night he came home bragging that he was going to take the house from his sister. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours, the reporter continued. Darius Adams has been found guilty on 12 counts of wire fraud, identity theft, and forgery. Sentencing is set for next month, but legal experts say he is facing a minimum of 8 years in federal prison. Vivian let out a sound that was half sob, half scream. "My baby," she wailed. "They took my baby." "They didn't take him," Lawrence muttered, staring at the screen. "He took himself. And we drove the getaway car." It was the first honest thing my father had said in decades. Across town, I was sitting in a very different room. I was in the office of the president of Spelman College. The mahogany desk was polished to a mirror shine, and the windows overlooked the lush green campus. Judge Sterling sat next to me. Mr. Henderson was on my other side. So it is settled, the president said, smiling at me with genuine warmth. The Arthur and Marie Brooks Memorial Scholarship Fund. It will provide full tuition, room and board for 10 students every year, specifically students who have lost their parents or are navigating the foster care system. I signed the check. It was for $5 million. It was the money my parents had stolen. I had recovered what I could from the sale of their assets before the IRS got involved, and I had added the rest from my own inheritance. I didn't want their dirty money. I wanted to wash it clean. You are doing a great thing, Keisha, the president said. Your grandparents would be honored. I hope so, I said, putting the pen down. I want their name to mean something again. I want Brooks to mean generosity, not greed. Later that afternoon, as I walked to my car, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was local. I answered it against my better judgment. Keisha. It was Vivian. Her voice was raspy, broken. She sounded like a ghost. Keisha, please do not hang up. I saw the news about Darius. I know you saw it. I did, I said, my voice steady. He is going to prison, Keisha. He is going to be destroyed in there. We need a lawyer. A real lawyer, not the public defender. We need an appeal. I am not paying for a lawyer, Vivian, I said. We are starving, she cried. Your father cannot find work. I am working at a diner, Keisha. A diner. My feet are bleeding every night. We are eating canned soup. We are living in a rat hole. That sounds difficult, I said, channeling the cold indifference they had shown me for 28 years. Perhaps you should budget better. We are your parents, she screamed, the facade cracking. You owe us. You are sitting on $30 million, and you won't even give us $5,000 for a retainer. You are evil. You are a monster. No, Mother, I said, unlocking my car door. I am a landscape architect, and I know that if you want a garden to grow, you have to pull the weeds, even if the weeds have been there for a long time. Even if the weeds share your DNA. I hung up. I blocked the number. I felt a pang of sadness, but it was a distant echo, like a pain in a phantom limb. It wasn't regret. It was just the final death rattle of the hope that they would ever be decent people. I drove back to Cascade Manor, but I didn't go inside. I went to the back garden. The construction crews were leaving for the day. For the past 3 months, I had poured my heart, my soul, and a significant portion of my inheritance into this project. I had torn down the high brick walls that separated the estate from the neighborhood. I had ripped out the pretentious hedges and the vanity statues. In their place, I had designed a sanctuary. Winding paths lined with native Georgia wildflowers. A playground with equipment accessible to children with disabilities. A community garden where neighbors could grow their own vegetables. A pavilion for outdoor concerts and picnics. It wasn't my private estate anymore. It was the Arthur and Marie Brooks Community Park. The grand opening was the next morning. The sun rose over Atlanta, bathing the new park in a golden light that made the dew on the azaleas sparkle like diamonds. I stood on the newly built bandstand looking out at the crowd. There were hundreds of people, neighbors I had known my whole life, the students who had received the first round of scholarships, city council members, and Judge Sterling standing in the front row beaming like a proud father. I was wearing a simple white dress, no designer labels, no flashy jewelry, just me. I stepped up to the microphone. The crowd hushed. Welcome, I said, my voice ringing clear across the lawn. My grandfather used to say that land is the only thing that lasts, but he was wrong. Love lasts, community lasts. And today, we are giving this land back to the community that he loved. As I spoke, I scanned the crowd. I saw Mrs. Gable nodding in approval. I saw the lady from the Botanical Society smiling. I saw the faces of people who had been lied to about me, but who had come to see the truth for themselves. And then I saw her. At the very edge of the park near the new wrought iron gates there was a woman. She was wearing a scarf over her head and oversized sunglasses trying to hide her face. Her coat was worn at the elbows, and she was clutching a large tote bag. It was Vivian. She was trying to push past the security guard I had hired. I could see her gesturing wildly, pointing at the stage, pointing at me. She was trying to tell him she was the mother of the woman on stage. She was trying to use her old currency. The guard, a large man named Marcus, shook his head. He held up a clipboard. I stopped speaking for a second. The silence stretched. The crowd turned to see what I was looking at. Vivian saw me looking. She pulled down her sunglasses. Her eyes were desperate, pleading. She mouthed the word please. She held out her hand, palm up, the universal gesture of the beggar. She wanted money. She wanted recognition. She wanted to be invited onto the stage to bask in the glory she hadn't earned. I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had left me at an airport, the woman who had stolen my tuition, the woman who had slapped me in my own foyer, and I felt nothing. I didn't feel hate. I didn't feel anger. I didn't even feel pity. I just felt the indifference you feel when you look at a stranger on the street. I gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of my head to Marcus. Marcus understood. He stepped in front of Vivian, blocking her view of the stage. He said something to her. I couldn't hear it, but I knew what it was. You are not on the list. Vivian recoiled as if she had been slapped. She looked at me one last time. She saw the scissors in my hand, ready to cut the ribbon. She saw the judge standing beside me. She saw the community cheering for me. And she saw that there was no place for her in this picture. She turned around. Her shoulders slumped. She hugged her tote bag to her chest and walked away, disappearing down the street, alone, unnoticed, unmourned. I turned back to the microphone. I dedicate this park to Arthur and Marie Brooks. I said, my voice strong and full of joy. May it be a place where everyone is welcome, everyone who knows how to love. I cut the ribbon. The silk parted with a satisfying snip. The crowd cheered. The band started playing jazz. Children ran onto the playground screaming with delight. Judge Sterling hugged me. You did it, Keisha. You really did it. I looked at the garden. It was blooming. It was alive. It was free. They say blood is thicker than water. They say you only get one family. They say you have to forgive and forget because you can't choose your relatives, but they are wrong. Sometimes the family tree is rotten at the root. Sometimes the water in the well is poisoned. And when that happens, you don't drink it. You don't water your garden with it. You drain it. You dig it out. You replace the soil. And you plant something new. I am not just the girl who inherited $30 million. I am the girl who inherited herself. I inherited my dignity. I inherited my future. And as I watched the children playing in the dirt, building castles out of mud and imagination, I knew one thing for sure. I was finally free. The most profound lesson from Keisha's journey is that shared DNA does not guarantee loyalty or love. True family is defined by action, support, and integrity, not just bloodlines. Sometimes the bravest and most necessary act of self-care is to sever ties with toxic relatives who value money over your well-being. Keisha proved that dignity is a currency far more valuable than any inheritance. By courageously removing the weeds of greed and betrayal from her life, she created the space for her own peace, success, and genuine happiness to finally bloom. If you believe that peace is more important than toxic loyalty, hit that subscribe button and share your own story of resilience in the comments below.